Thank you all for coming out tonight. I don't know a lot of people here in the room, so I'm going to introduce myself a little bit. I've never met a lot of you in person, although I've seen you guys on TV, believe it or not, on your board meeting. So my name is Brian Foley. I am the town manager as of June. I am born and raised in Tolland. I moved here in 1969, right from the hospital. I have a daughter in our wonderful school system. As I explained to Dr. Willett before, I have a lot of issues with education here in these United States. Not one of those issues has been reflected in my daughter's education here in Tolland. I could not be happier with the education that she's getting here. I have an 80-year-old mother here in town as well. Lives by herself on a fixed income. So I cover a lot of this area. I was Tolland High School, and I moved back here to raise a family from South Windsor, specifically for the school system. So I'm very happy and very much love the town of Tolland. Just some quick background on myself. As many of you may or may not know, I was a police officer in the city of Hartford for 24 years. Spent most of my time either in specialized units, homicide, major crimes, internal affairs, or chief of the detective bureau. My entire role there was in relation to political and community relations, communications, and of course, every single investigative crime that happened on the city for the last 8 years or 9 years of my career. It was a lot. From there, a quick stint in television, and then my former boss in Hartford became the commissioner of Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection, working directly for Governor Lamont. He called and asked that I be his assistant. I did. I stayed there for 3 years. Very similar roles there in regards to really preventing violence, community outreach in the cities, and directly politically liaisoning with our elected officials, both the state and federal level. I worked very closely, obviously, at the right hand of the commissioner, very closely with the governor on a lot of matters. And last year, this opportunity arose, and I applied, and couldn't consider myself any luckier to be where I am here today. Some people, when I was applying for the job, I hear things, oh, he's just a cop. What does he know about being a town manager? Just a cop. What does he know about budgeting? I can tell you this, in Hartford, in my role, we would prepare a budget, and our budgets would get cut. And when a budget got cut in my vice and narcotics division, and I lost detectives, or I lost overtime in vice and narcotics, and therefore lost the ability to chase fentanyl, chase heroin, what do you think happened? People died, and I could correlate those numbers to deaths. When they cut numbers in intelligence, when they cut numbers in major crimes, they cut, and they did, always. When they cut numbers in homicide, I promise you, violent crime went up. Deaths go up when that happened. And on the other end of it, I end up with the mothers in my office looking for answers. I understand the weight of making awful decisions. I understand the weight of making great decisions. I want you all to know, one, I do not get emotional over decisions. I've made too many decisions in my life that have resulted in what I just talked about. That I can deal with the nightmares on my own, that I don't have emotion over these decisions. I want to work with all of you. I've been available through this entire process. I've spoke to many of you in this room on both sides of the aisle to discuss any number of topics, and I want to let you all know I'm here for that throughout this process. Council brought me on, and one of the things they asked and charged me to do was to attempt to depolarize our town, and to try to bring people together. It's a work in progress. I can say this, in the 7 months that I've been here, and they're gonna get sick of hearing it, but I love every one of our town councilors. I love working with them. I embrace their work ethic. I embrace their passion, and I embrace their ability to work together, to debate, and compromise. It has been an amazing 7 months, and they are certainly an example for me to follow in relation to discussing things and coming to a consensus agreement. Hasn't always been easy. But I believe that people in the town watch how we are and how we behave and how we act. And in that, the reflection of us reflects on them. And they've been great. And I know I'm going to lose probably more than one maybe in the next election. But with that, I've also worked very closely with Ryan McCann and Lisa Burns, who have been absolutely amazing through these 7 months in their ability to work with me and on different projects. And I think we have a great base and groundwork moving forward. Yes, there are bumpy roads that lie ahead. Again, I promise to, I try to impart to my staff, keep my emotions up here at a professional and executive level and make decisions with the best information I have available, and do that with some sort of consensus. As Lisa Hancock and Mike will tell you, when I'm in a meeting, I will go around the room and get everyone's opinion. Sometimes we have to just make a decision and go. So it's difficult. I thank you all for joining me here in this process. Again, I'm available should you need anything. But it is well after 7 o'clock. Pursuant to Town Charter C9-4, I'm required to call a meeting, a joint meeting of the Board of Education and Town Council together to discuss the appropriations of the Board of Ed budget. So that meeting is starting now. The first thing I have to do is go over the budget process. So I've said I left everyone. There's nothing new to you all, but it is new to me. So I mean, not new to me. You read it once, but so we just go through it here. I'll go through the highlights. So back in October, we started on our capital improvements plan. And each department head had to submit what they needed to capital improvements to my office, as did Dr. Willett. As Dr. Willett can tell you, and my staff, everything, darn near every single item on that capital budget I went and looked at. Anything that with the Board of Ed, Walt met me there, explained what he needed, wanted, and reasons why or didn't. From there, I met with Lisa Hancock, and we would determine the best financial approach in regards to spending, in regards to debt and that sort of thing, and then would make our decisions on the capital budget. As you know, I've already submitted that to council. And then we moved on to the operations side, where all the department heads submitted their operations budget to our office. I looked at all of them, sat with Lisa and Mike Wilkinson, and then called the big ones back, the fire department and the DPW, and then made, I don't want to use the word severe, but large cuts. For those on the board who don't know, one of the first things I did when I got in the door here was starting to review apparatus and cut major things out of that. I call it the front window test. When I look out my front window, do I see too much of X, Y, or Z? And that's what we started to really attack hard. Early on, when I first got here, I sat down with a staff member and we went through this exact budget calendar. And when that staff member got to February 23rd today, he said, "Oh," and then there's this awful meeting that we have to go through, and it's just brutal. And so I've been looking forward to this. And it's roughly mid-July. So and I hope it not to be that again. I'm here and I don't make any decisions in a bubble by myself. That I try to do with consensus. On March 8th, I'll submit my budget to council for their review. And then mid-March, we'll start really our discussions with council on the budget and everything. We'll deep dive 3 nights in a row. And end of March, there'll be a public hearing in relation to my budget and the Board of Ed's budget, the capital improvements plans, basically everything. With any luck, the budget will be finalized on March 28th. We'll advertise the budget for requirements. And then on the 19th of April, there'll be a budget presentation here at Town Hall. And on May 2nd, there will be hopefully our only budget referendum, but I understand that is not always the case. And then we make our mill rate adjustment based on that. So one more thing, I do enjoy a great relationship with Dr. Willett. He and I couldn't be, I don't think, any different personalities, but I think it works to our favor, and our relationship is I'm very lucky to have him as a steward to help me through a lot of these processes, and since I've been here.
Sorry. camera wasn't on it.
You're stealing my thunder. As you may have noticed, I do try to keep things light and somewhat not humorous, but just I try to keep things so light. But again, I have a great relationship. Well, Dr. Will, thank you so much for the last 7 months and meeting with me on a regular basis. You know, I've missed you off a couple of times and it was not intentional. And so I've tried to adjust that, but we have a great relationship and I hope to have a great working relationship with all of you here in the future. And with that, I'm going to kick it off to my colleague, Dr. Willett, for the Board of Ed budget presentation.
Yeah, and of course, as things would happen, I just stuck with my face.
No, yeah,
Just,
That'd be again.
So in the end, I mirror what Mr. Foley said. You know, he's been great. He's great for the town of Tolland. I'm very happy this year, and you know, he's been wonderful to work with. It's a good contribution to, good addition to the town staff because the town staff has always been fantastic to work with. So it's another reason why you know, I'm thankful to be working with Tolland. So my part of this is fairly brief today. What I'm going to do is, you know, and traditionally what we've tried to do is not have this be some painful 45-page PowerPoint. Instead, I'm usually asked to create a one-pager that's you know, that embodies, you know, as much as I can on one page of you know, what the situation is for the Board of Education, and then ultimately, you know, serve to answer any questions you have or have any try to give you any clarities that you need. So I actually failed in the endeavor to make it one pager. I mean, technically it's one piece of paper, but it is two sides. So I mean, you know, when they say one piece of paper, that works for one page. You can take a look at the waterfall graph here. The waterfall graph has a comparison of fiscal year 23 Board of Ed budget that was adopted to the proposed fiscal year 24 Board of Ed budget that was adopted, you know, and is in the state of being before you now as a town council. So after various conversations of color choices, we settled on these colors. So if you attach the red with other kinds of extreme colors, that's not going to be on this. But you take a look at it.
Okay.
If you take a quick look at it, what it really kind of mirrors here is the second page or the other page where there are significant cost drivers to the Board of Education this year that it has very little control over or discretion over. And this is taken from an object summary budget. So there's going to be salaries in here that aren't strictly the contractual agreed, you know, elements on the other page. So there's individual contracts, things like that. So it's slightly different in terms of its numbers, but it's pretty right on in terms of its magnitudes. So if you take a look at the fiscal year 23 budget where it was, this kind of climbs up to the fiscal year 24 budget that was adopted by the board and sent to the town manager. You look at salaries, benefits, transportation, tuition, and utilities. The aspects driving this budget are really these big chunks of the budget. Sorry.
I was going to say, the camera is not on. That's what I think a lot of the conversations going on. And also, we don't have this to show the people at home near one of that chart. So those are two considerations. Typically, at least the owl picks up who was talking at the time at the moment, but right now it's just black. And I think that's what I kind of saw some conversations going back and forth about how they can see tops of heads and XYZ, but now it's actually black.
Yeah, I think unfortunately due to the Wi-Fi issues that most people have been having, I think it may have forced it to just run off the audio so the recording will still be available, but it looks as though the video might not be working. So that is unfortunate.
And then the second one is just if you could show that maybe online to the viewers.
Yeah, so what I'll do is as soon as I'm done blabbing away here, I will actually upload this to the Board of Ed's budget site during the meeting. So people will be able to see it under that Board of Ed, under the www.tolland.k12.ct.us. There's a budget link off to the right. If you click on it, you'll be able to click on budget documents, and I'll put this right up there. when I'm done talking about it here. However, if you do look at the Board of Ed budget that is online, the Board of Ed budget itself has a page that has this, roughly one of the sides of this document in it. So if you look at page 8 of the Board of Ed adopted budget document on that site, page 8 basically has the cost drivers. So while you won't get to see the beautiful waterfall graph, you will get to see the table of cost drivers that is on the other page of this 2-page document. So I'll post that when I'm done kind of going over it briefly here. But with respect to the waterfall, you can see that the major drivers of the budget are really the things that there's really not much discussion or control over. And things like, even things like the professional services and support have gone down. So where you see, this is obviously a great truncation of a $44 million budget that is multi-lined. Because the drivers are in these areas of salaries, benefits, transportation, tuition, utilities, there's a lot of other areas that are actually at trend or below trend at this point. And there's a number of areas this year that we actually are in a state of overspent on. So we've actually frozen the budget for this year to make sure that we come in for a responsible landing, in a budget that's in the green, so to speak. But at this point, we are in a very lean state with respect to the budget. In addition to that, some of the highlights of the budget that the Board of Ed put forward are that it takes and it keeps these crucial positions. Right now, when we had the ESSER grants, we included positions in those grants because we had very, very high sizes, class sizes, and a lot of COVID impacts, particularly in the pre-K to 5 grades. And because we had those impacts, we used some of the ESSER grants to place positions in kindergarten and grade 2. At this point, one of the ESSERs was ending, so we transferred from grant to operating budget a 0.6 FTE kindergarten teacher and a 1.0 social worker. And so these are the only 2 things that came over position-wise during this budget process here as as an add to the budget from the grant. And these 2 positions are crucial, obviously, right now. The school systems across the state and country are struggling with the after effects of COVID. People can't get access to mental health services. Many families, they can't avail themselves of these things. So having the social worker and having additional staff in our school and the kindergarten have been absolutely crucial, and they've kept this class sizes manageable. If we did not have that K position, our class sizes would be significantly higher, and they're already pretty high in general. So having a transfer of the 0.6 FTE kindergarten, 1.0 social worker is extremely important for sustaining the quality of education. Utilizing the Educational Reserve Fund, the board wants to use that to acquire the Educational Technology Initiative units for grades 6 and 9, and therefore took that out of the budget request. So it's a responsible use of ERF for one of the reasons under, Ordinance 86, Chapter 8, that it is able to do that. Maintains pathways, some of the most important things that we're doing right now to make sure the school district is competitive against the money that's going into magnets and charters is to make these pathways where the kids can have and follow a plan of study. They can engage in various activities and courses with respect to that plan of study and graduate with a mark of distinction on their transcripts in that area or pathway. With that, that gives them an extra competitiveness when they're applying to certain schools where there's an emphasis on those pathways. So right now, the school system has embarked on pathways in business and engineering, and that's been very successful for us. In this way, it doesn't really cost a lot for the district to do this, and the district's able to maintain pursuit of those. A lot of money from the state government has gone additionally into these magnets and charters. They offer things like engineering. They offer things like business academies. And so it's one of the ways that we're avoiding attrition and therefore avoiding additional loss of funds to some of these other schools. It also maintains crucial cost avoidance programming. We have excellent programs that help serve students of all areas of need and exceptionalities. Those programs include LEAP, the Tolland Transition Academy, the ABA program, this program for students with working in the autism, and having the autism spectrum. So these are crucial programs for us that we have in district that provide an opportunity for kids to be educated in their own community with their peers. And it also is very important for cost avoidance for this district. The average price of outpatient placement at this point could be stated to be anywhere from 70 to 90, 98,000. Our most recent figures, 98,000 is the average outplacement incurrence for the district. So when you consider that LEAP has 30 some kids in it, that's an extremely important program. Even if only a fraction of the kids in that program would end up being outplaced without it, it would be very impactful for the district. And it costs far less than it saves the district in many ways. So maintaining those crucial cost avoidance programs is absolutely imperative for us. And that's part of what is maintained in the budget. Reductions of personnel in this budget include 1.5 paraprofessionals, 1.0 educational technology teacher, 1.0 middle school interventionist, 1.0 financial accountant, 0.27 speech pathologist, and many other reductions to ICMA, OPEB, course reimbursements, textbooks, PEDH, special education programming, legal, instructional supplies, furniture, fixtures, ed tech, and other kinds of stipends. So many reductions already occurred to bring the budget to where it is. So it's a budget that's been done responsibly. It's a budget that was deeply impacted by circumstances really beyond the control of the board this year. And when you really do take a good look in the Board of Ed adopted budget, and you see that the competitive bargaining unit agreements were below the averages for the state, and that the teachers in general terms for their compensation are modestly compensated. I would say fairly, but modestly compensated across the board. Your board has worked extremely hard to make sure that the deal that it's getting from its employees is a fair deal both for them and for the district. And it's worked hard to make sure that cost avoidance programs exist so that the only alternative is not outplacement. And it's worked very hard to make sure that despite the pandemic, that the class sizes, K5, 6, 12, are manageable, reasonable, and allow productive education to be occurring. Because of the insurance impacts and other impacts this year that are illustrated by the 2-pager here, and also illustrated in the narrative of the document itself, the Board of Ed adopted a budget document, you can see that the board's been in a very tight spot and is working very hard to make sure that the children of Tolland, community of Tolland, get the appropriate level of service for them. So that's essentially it. And at this point, I hand the floor back to Mr. Foley.
So I'm going to hand it off now to our chair, Mr. Steve Jones.
Thank you, Brian. So we're now on item 3, which is recommendations and suggestions to the DOE regarding consolidation of non-education services and cost savings. So I believe last year, Lisa, when we met in this room, there was discussion about the potential combination of financial services. Do you happen to have an update on that, or any general updates about the cost or the feasibility of that?
The grant that we had applied for was put on hold, so we did not get the funding to move forward with that process. Some of the research that I did during that time showed some of the costs regarding, combining the financial systems and things like that, but not much has been done. The financial system alone would have been over $250,000 just to be able to bring the Board of Education and town into one system. So that seems costly. A lot of times when you're combining finance departments, and that's why you wanted to have this study done, but a lot of times you end up having to hire more people, which could cost more money. It all depends on what the end result is that you're looking for. And if you're certainly looking for savings, that doesn't always result in savings when you're doing a combination. There's been several communities within the state that did combine, and now they're changing back to being separate again. But as far as the CROG, I have not been involved with it. since I left the office.
Okay, yeah, no worries. I assume, I think there's discussions previously, it was the cost for the consultant alone would be basically adding in the other positions worth of time and labor to the effort, but I don't know if there's anyone else that has any questions or suggestions regarding DOE consolidation of non-education services cost savings. All right, seeing none from the council, we'll move to item 4, questions from the public with a 2-minute limit specific to the Board of Education budget, with questions being directed by the town council chair to the appropriate body for response. So if you're on Zoom, you can hit the raise hand function or *9. I don't believe we have anyone from the public in person tonight. So, all right, I see Rini Bisa.
Yes, hello, Rini
Oh, and also
BC,
state your name and address for the
230
record.
Grand Hill Road. This has been very challenging. I just want to say we can barely see.
One moment,
you,
Rini, if
like,
you're trying to speak,
this has been a train
it's
wreck.
highlighting you, but it's not projecting the audio to us.
Yeah, well, that's what's happening to us. We can't see anything. We can barely hear you. Anyway, I'm just going. See what she's saying. Can you hear me? Hello?
See her voice.
Hear you.
No, there's a problem with how this is
This is
connected.
awful. So
Excuse
bad.
me, all.
Thank you for your patience, everyone. We're already dealing with another technical difficulty.
Okay, that's going.
At least a moment of clarity, right? What Brian called an awful meeting, at least memorable for some.
I didn't call it that. That was how it reported.
Yes.
Right on track. We did test.
I'm unclear if I'm still on. On my 2 minutes, or I don't know what's going on. Hello, anyone? Nothing?
I think people out that are virtual can hear you right now, but I don't think they can hear you in the room, and they're working on troubleshooting that. It seems like.
Okay, I thought maybe they thought they fixed it. That's why I was like trying to get through, but I appreciate that.
That's the last thing I heard was them say that.
Oh, okay. They're working on it.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate that. This
You just ask people like type their messages in and read them in their voice.
I know that might end up being a potential solution.
Celebrity voice.
Yeah.
Celebrity. We just need that. It wasn't you. Can you ask? So.
Really, click twice, click twice.
Sorry, really, do you want, I'm gonna ask you to mute, if you can unmute and audio working now.
Are you talking to me?
All right, good to go. Your time is still at 2 minutes and you're welcome to start speaking now.
Okay, so I'll say this. Renee B saw 230 Grand Hill Road. When you guys are all talking, we can't hear anything. It's a complete like cluster of voices and you can't hear what anyone is really saying. So with that said, my input is the increase that you are proposing, that the Board of Ed is proposing, it is unrealistic, not good. I would never support something like this. It's way too expensive for the taxpayers. It's super expensive to live here already. And I think you need to find ways to make it less. So that's my input.
Thank you, Renee. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak? Again, if you're on a mobile device, you can hit *9 or the raise hand function. And remember to state your name and address for the record. All right, Heather McCann.
Hi. Heather McCann, 62 Crossan Drive. It's more of a comment than a question. My family is one of many families in our community who moved here for our schools for one reason or another. Tolland's biggest asset is our school system, from our teachers to our special education services, our sports to our administration. Families have either settled here years ago or only have recently moved here for this reason. We had a lot more to offer years ago. We used to offer more programs and services. Some of our senior elected officials' children have also benefited from them while their children were enrolled. The cuts in recent years have resulted in underfunding our schools. The budgets have not kept up with inflation. We help the entire community by supporting our biggest assets. We are not helping the single income families by underfunding our community's biggest asset. That single working mom is now regretting her decision to live in Tolland because her children are not receiving the education she moved here for. And her children are now statistically more likely to struggle in school due to a lack of services and resources to be successful. You are in fact hurting these children more by doing so. Taking care of lower income or fixed income families, including our seniors, means advocating and encouraging use of our programs offered in our community designed for this reason. And more importantly, proposing, supporting, and voting at all levels of government for better social programs is really how you take care of these folks. Good luck to all tonight. Base decisions on real numbers, not arbitrary feel-good ones. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Heather. And it looks like next we have Mary Rose DeBerrick.
Good evening, everyone. It's Mary Rose DeBerrick, 37 Ryan Road. Actually, I just have one quick question. Does a Board of Education budget increase of 5.94% mean that our taxes are going up that high? And thank you. Thanks for all you do. I support this budget, support our children and the education here in Tolland, but thanks for all you do.
All right, thank you, Mary Rose, and I'll direct that question. I think I saw Lisa, your head movement, so I'm assuming you have a good answer for it.
Sure, be happy to try to respond. I do not have the actual calculated impact of that amount as of yet, because I'm still trying to finalize the town manager's budget. However, the tax increase certainly will go up. It may not go up as much as that, depending on the other revenues that we have. When we meet with the town council to start deliberating on the budget, I will have some scenarios that will show you the different impact on the mill rate going forward. It certainly could have a very high impact, but I can't say it's going to be exactly that 5.97% that's being, or 96% that's being proposed.
Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak? Again, it's either the raise hand function or *9 if you're on a mobile device. All right, going once, going twice. We shall move to item 5, which is petitions and/or questions to the Board of Education from town council members specific to the BOE budget. Just general housekeeping, if you identify yourself, just because I think we mentioned that it's hard to hear people, you can just clearly identify yourself when you speak, and I'll try and identify you as well, so it's clear for everybody who's at home. So I will open the floor to questions from council members. Councilor Luba.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and just so it's clear, Lou Luba, Town Council. Just sort of piggyback off of what the question that was just asked is, if I may, through Mr. Chair, inquire as far as the amount that the BOE budget actually constitutes for the overall town budget. That's my first question that it can be answered.
Explain.
So that.
Yeah, of course. Brian, are you okay if the questions directed through you to Lisa or other staff members?
You can direct them to me. Lisa,
yes.
you answer.
Sorry about that.
So my question is that for the overall, like, what is the basic overall amount of like a percentage of our BOE budget as of our overall town budget? Where when I first came in, I believe that our BOE budget constituted approximately, I think it was 80% of our overall town budget. And I want to know if that's still accurate, so that could give a better view for people as far as how much that how much that it might increase.
Right now, we're looking at about a 70% Board of Ed and 30% town. Right now is with town and debt and capital projects. So those three would be about 30%. And the Board of Ed portion would be about almost 70%.
So at 70% of the overall budget. So okay, thank you. And then the second question I have, Mr. Chair, and this is in a general sense, is that it's my understanding that Superintendent Willett made a certain request. I think it was a 5.94% or 5.92% increase, and that it was overall. Then the BOE Board of Education came back at a even higher at 5.96, and I'm looking for some reasoning or justification as far as where you have Mr. The superintendent who comes in with the budget and has taken a look at everything, why the BOE is going above what was being requested, if I may, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
I don't know if that'd be a question that can clarify through Dr. Willett or any member of the Board of Education.
I would direct that to whomever would be. I'll direct to Ms. Lundgren since as the chair.
Yeah.
Nope. So to be perfectly honest with you, when I had a statement that I was going to read about everything, just kind of top to bottom. But when we reviewed his budget, there were definitely a couple of line items that we looked at, and I thought to myself, well, we're already giving up an interventionalist, and we're also giving up another course, which is a high school course for students that deal with children. So they would be missing out the actual course requirement where it would turn into an internship versus having the lessons about, child psychology, doing all the actual learning about it, not just doing an internship. So you're still learning about how the brain functions, things of that nature. So to be perfectly honest with you, there was a few line items that we had taken out, and I put that back in. Because to me, I don't want to see more programs being cut.
So, because I guess because the whole thing that we're always told is, and the mantra has been trust Dr. Willett because he knows what's best. He's making the best budget possible, and then it's I understand that it's the board's position, but it's at what point do we stop trusting and then start looking at what the board is actually doing? For putting these other items back in, and because if I'm going to trust Dr. Willett as far as what's appropriate, then where does that end? And then where do I have to worry about the Board of Education supplanting that issue? So I guess that's a question that I have. And then as far as the overall that is, it looks based upon the quick view of this of the review that I have here, that there were some recommended positions that were going to be eliminated, and that's how much of an impact that would be. So again, that would, as far as what positions were being identified, because it seems that whenever we're faced with a budget issue, and it comes up every time, that the first thing that's being cut is the positions, rather than looking for savings in other spots. And so it always seems that the Board of Education or that the town council, with the common refrain that I've gotten for the past, on this is, well, how can you do this? You're gonna be losing these positions. Where we're just saying that this is the budget and it's up to the Board of Education or moreover, Dr. Willett to decide how that's spent. And that if it's making these cuts on the positions, that's really the Dr. Willett's decision or the Board of Education's decision on how it comes down. So I want to know, if there are positions that are being eliminated, why were there no other savings that were found within that budget?
Well, after reviewing what we were sacrificing in order to meet those recommendations that he had for percentage, majority of us decided that it was not worth sacrificing the staff and the courses, having what we want for our students' needs. So that's why the majority did support what the budget was that we had. But even in the original budget that he had provided, there were still cuts that I still didn't like. Like we're losing an interventionist. So right now we should need to be upping our interventionist. Birch Grove, we have what is a 36% rate? 32% rate of IEPs and 504s. That's a huge chunk of children that need additional help. So cutting staff and that are interacting with our children are not what we need to be focusing on.
And I agree with you 100%. But I'm saying that are there other places of savings? I mean, are there other spots? Because I see that as presented here, 97% of what we have is already under contractual obligations for raises, for insurance and other things for these full-time positions that we already have. And by either increasing or other things, we're only adding to that. And so that's going to be basically a recurring issue where the more people that we add on, the more this budget goes up because of that. And we're facing this issue again where there are other points of savings where there's non-recurring expenses that can be cut to accommodate these other positions.
And just looking at the waterfall graph, you will see a big majority of this is due to the insurance, which is something that we completely can discuss and have town council members have that discussion, because if we could get some help on that, that would alleviate a lot.
Well, but I mean, we can't go back and renegotiate it. That's a problem, is that we can't, that these insurance, my understanding is that these insurance issues are something that when once the contract's done, we can't renegotiate until the future contract comes up. And when the future contract comes up, we're always faced with, how do we address this issue? Every time that we've had this, every time we've had this discussion, and every time that we've had to address the issue of teachers' contracts or employment contracts, that's always one of the biggest expenses, but that's almost a non-negotiable that we have. So again, that's something that's always built in. So why, we're always facing the same issue, and that rather than trying to address that by finding other cost savings that would be non-recurring, we're just adding more recurring expenses. So I don't know if that's
Okay, Dr. Willett, yeah, I see your hand is up. Okay.
Just a couple of points of clarification. Of course, again, this work is not what happened. I raised my hand and the computer flits out on me, but to answer the question of the increase from the 5.92 edged up slightly for the Board of Ed adopted budget, because there's a lot of questions through that. So I'll try to cover them as I can recall. So between the time that the SPB was proposed back in January and February adoption of the Board of Ed budget, a couple of things changed in our budget. So the audit costs went up. We had an increase in Medicare. We had a change in degree status for staff member to put them onto a higher step. We had to add additional unemployment for some of the RIFs back. So some of those things are what caused the differential and caused it to go up just a little bit between the two budgets. And because those were going to impact the future budget, the board did the logical thing and added that in to the overall budget request. And that's what made it slightly different from the 592 to 596. In addition to that, what it did do is it did decide to trade a little bit the retirement differential we got from an additional retirement during that span of time as well, and a pair that had been in there that shouldn't, and traded that out for the child development program and saved the entire child development program. So they made those slight differences in those two budgets because of things that came back in between that span of time that we became aware of, and therefore adjusted the budget accordingly. As far as cuts, there were almost $1 million of reductions already, and most of them were not staffed. So, you know, we have course reimbursements, textbooks, PD, special ed programming, legal, instruction, furniture and fixtures, coach stipends. There's round after round after round of cuts. And so, you know, I can list all of the cuts that the board would like me to from the inception all the way through the point of completion. But we did our best to avoid it from being staffed. I never want it to be staffed. I don't like it to be staffed. It preference us for it to be staffed. So there were, you know, many reductions prior to making it staff. And because we're doing a one-pager here, we're consolidating. But you can tell that there was, because even with those massive cost drivers making up 97% of the budget, most of what we took was out of these lines that were close to trend or at trend already. And you can see that from the water, because there's not a lot of other areas that are increased at all here. Most of those increases don't represent the general increase in materials you see across the country, or the general increase you see on the other areas across the country with the economy. So right now, really, this is a step backwards as high as it is, because there's so many things that, you know, if we go any further on these lines, we're going to be underfunding for next year, and we're going to be in a deficit position, which means we got to be careful about not taking things that are actually red herring and false takes. If you take something we're going to have to put in place anyway, then that's going to be a negative we're going to go into next year with, ultimately, or become a negative next year, and we'll end up cutting staff then. So this budget had a tremendous number of increases in it already, hundreds of thousands, million at that point. And then what we arrived to for staff is what you see here after all of those hundreds of thousands. So I can put them all out if the board wants me to, listing from the point of the beginning of the process all the way through the end.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't think that's, I mean, that we could, if that's something that you want to put together and present as to Mr. Foley, so that the town council could see that, I think that'd be great. One question I have as well is that sort of going by the line item things that you have on, it would be page 16 of 40, that we're looking at line 560, the tuition education agency budget, which seems to be a 28% increase. Can you just, you know, just for my edification as far as what that encompasses and what that incurs?
Mostly it's out of district tuition placements, and the differential between this year's and last year's budget, we're basically looking at a potential over budget of about 400,000 in this year's budget, and that is adjusting our budget accordingly next year to adjust.
Okay, so that's where out of district tuitions.
Where you see tuitions under special ed is mostly out of district tuition.
Okay, so that's the line 560 would cover that issue.
That would be part of that. Yeah, there's 4 lines, 3 lines in there to cover most of special ed expense, 560, 561, 564, and that's part of it. But that this year we are over budget at a point where, you know, I've frozen everything to be mindful of it. COVID left us with some very significant impacts, as Ms. London said. We have a 32% identification rate at the K2, pre-K2 level of special ed. We have never seen that before. It's been more like 12. And our outplacement now, average outplacement cost is $98,000. Over, you know, almost 2 million in outplacements. And at this point, our spend is probably going to be at a 1.3 million in our reimbursements will be at something like a 760 to 900. So we're looking at a potential $400,000 deficit in that area, and that's where it's made up for between the two budgets. We're just trying to make sure that we can balance things out appropriately and never have to come to the town for money at the end of the budget.
I appreciate it. That's along the same lines what you and I discussed last time when we had our meeting. I believe it was last budget cycle on that whole issue. Is that correct?
Well, it depends. We have a lot of conversations.
Yeah, I know.
You know, but I think if you're referring to generally special education costs, our efforts at mitigating those cost of wage programs.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just gonna jump really quick because I saw someone else raise their hand. I wasn't sure if it was Katie or if it was Jen. I thought I saw a hand raised, so I don't know if I saw it correctly.
No, I did. I can hold my comment.
Well, no, I just want to make sure everybody has a chance to speak in case there's anything you want to respond to, that any loose comments or questions, if it's helpful to.
I was just going to point out to the original comment Mr. Luba made about why the Board of Ed is in the position to cut positions. And I think it's important to know, you know, it's page 12 of my budget book. I'm not sure what it is in your budget book, but shows the 5 and 10 year average of the yearly budgets. So I think we're in this position partly because we've been dealing, you know, just over the last 6 years, 0%, 0.78, 0.84, 0.1, and a 2 and a 2.25. That's not a healthy raise year over year in an education budget.
Okay. And then actually one other quick thing is, Dana, are you able to raise your hand just so that I see you at the top, just so that in case you have any input, I can just find you on the screen. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Did it pull me up?
You're good.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Councilor Luker.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. That's all I have at this point.
Okay.
I wanted to touch base on one thing that Councilman Wilbur said there. You know, if you look back, and I thank Mr. Foley for the budget schedule here, but if you look at the board side there is 3 or 4 meetings. There's almost a month between the presentation of the superintendent's proposed budget and the document, the Board of Ed budget that you guys received that goes over there. During that time, and I reference you back to the minutes and the videos of our meeting, there were many conversations where we turned to Dr. Willett and we said, okay, you know, this number represents what we think you say are needs and not necessarily wants. But what happens if we trim here? What happens if we adjust here? At one point, we sent him back to his office and said, okay, give us one of these that has a 3%, a 4%, and a 5%, because we wanted to see what that does. You know, we're not worried, or, you know, we're not looking to go out there and reduce heads. And I say reduce and not cuts, because, you know, it's not necessarily somebody losing their livelihood. But are we worried about, you know, at what point do our facilities cease to, you know, start having aesthetic adjustments and start becoming health and safety type of thing? You know, so those numbers, when he comes back and we vote on that Board of Ed budget, they represent not just what his people are saying they need, but also the board's attempt to look at that through the lens of prioritization.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Mr. Holt. Councilman Yurcheck.
Are you all?
Oh, yes, I am. Thank you.
Calling you to check town council. I just have a few questions. I've been following along, but I don't know about anybody else here on the council. I keep them updated at town council meetings. But I guess the bigger line is ours, that insurance line. It seems like it's like clearly don't understand it. If somebody can break it down pretty easy, why it's so high, and I guess it's not going to happen on the town side. Anybody?
I mean, I would defer to Lisa. I can certainly answer that. I don't know how much I learned to talk, and I can defer to Lisa.
Yeah, just give it a 30,000 foot one down in my backyard. Yeah.
Okay.
This big fire.
I didn't bring all my notes out of me on insurance, but we have some.
Well, can you just repeat the question? Yes, because I'm trying to control this whole thing.
Oh, I apologize. I was just looking for a quick overview or whatever of the insurance line, why it's so high, and is that gonna happen on the town side?
Yeah. All right, well, I can grab it. And
all right, go ahead. And I
so
can
if we're talking about health insurance, so as Seth talked about at our meeting, we've had an increase in large claims over the last year or so. So that has driven up what our expected rates are going to need to be to meet those claims. They continue into next year. So right now we're 16.42% with a rate increase. So if those continue, then we'll be okay. If they get worse, that's not good. If they get better, that's good. But every year is different. We've been pretty good over the last couple of years. We've been at 0 multiple times, which is a good thing, so that our budget can stay the same. But unfortunately, this is a bad year, as you know, or I don't know if everyone knows. We're part of eChip, which is a health insurance cooperative, which we joined. So we're the first communities in the state. It was a state law that allowed municipalities to join. And basically we are our own health insurer. We have called Egypt, so we're self-insured. So we have to pay all our claims, we have to run that through, so we have to generate the revenue so that we can pay the claims. So we have a consultant locked in, and they help us do that, as well as Egypt. They have an administrator, and they also have a health insurer consultant. So that process is done multiple times. In November, we review it with Egypt and also with our consultant. We meet internally with Walt to look at what we can do, any adjustments we can be made. But right now it's at 16.42, which is a larger increase than we've had in 3 or 4 years, but that's kind of where we are now, and it doesn't look like it's going to go down anytime soon in this budget season. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. So I guess it's not too early, but like, do you think it's gonna be as high next year? Or I know I don't mind the conservative bit about it, but I'm just wondering, is it gonna continue to be this high? Is this something?
It really depends on what the claims continue to do. You know, large claims, you don't know if they're gonna fall off or not, if they're gonna go above. We have stop loss insurance, so if they go over a certain level, then insurance picks it up, but if they stay below that level, so for net, if you're talking, are you talking next budget year or the year beyond
Yeah,
that?
I'm just wondering, I know we can't really predict next year, but is this just like a off year that it's extremely high, and then next year it might fall off?
Well, and this is directed towards BOE or Tolland?
It's more BOE, kind of both, because I think if it's going up on their side, it's also gonna go up on our side.
Well, one of the things Seth talked about is if we're possibly in like a COVID effect, where people are going back to their doctors, particularly with cancers, and they may not have gone during the time of COVID, so now they're going and those are getting picked up. So that's one of the reasons why we've had a uptick in large claims. So that's one of the things he mentioned as a possibility. So that may balance off if people have all gone to their doctors and dealt with that, but it's really hard to tell whether that's going to continue or not. I would hope it wouldn't, but I don't think we can look that far.
I mean, so obviously the claims have gone up, and we asked that, you know, what's your prognosis? This was 3 months ago or so. One, we wanted to look at the next couple months and let's see how it progresses over the next 2 months. I want to reiterate what he had told us a few months ago. He didn't show us the data. It was Tolland and one other town south of the state that we were an anomaly, and a high rising anomaly to the rest of the towns. So it wasn't like the entire state is experiencing this increase. It was really 2 towns that were not this high, and it was us and I don't think it was Madison, and I don't remember either one. And so they cannot predict. We had hoped it'd go down over the next couple of the following months up to where we are now. It really hasn't, right? No. So it has not gone down as we had hoped, and they had hoped. So they track the trends. They are our consultant. They are the professionals. They look at short-term trends, long-term trends, the different costs with the different trends. They came in with a whole presentation for us. The short answer, you know, they don't have a crystal ball as to whether the rate's going to come down. Did Tolland and the other town jump up ahead of the other ones and they're coming up? We just don't know that.
But one of the things we'll do, and we always do every year it happens, is once Brian's budget comes out, we will sit down again with Walt and Lisa and Brian and our consultant and see if there's any flexibility at all where we are. Right now, it doesn't look like there is based on the rates or where the claims are. In other years, claims have gotten better between, say, October and February, and we could make an adjustment. I don't see that happening, but we're going to try after the budget comes out to see if there's any flexibility to give people options if they have to cut their budget or something, but we'll see.
Colleen, are you all set before I bounce over for response a second? Christine Griffin and then Christine Ford.
So just to kind of bounce off what Colleen was saying, and this might be to you, Mr. Foley, is there a way for the entire council and the entire board to get a roll forward of the account? So I'm looking at the audited financials for June 30th, 2022. That shows we have the net position at the end of the year is 2.6 million. could we get what to date, I guess we can maybe do it as of February 28th, and then your projection of where we're gonna be at 6/30/2023. I think that would be.
Projection where we be.
We do not have a projection of where we would be as of June 30th of 23.
Okay.
You know, we could certainly put the financials together. Based on, you know, the claims and everything that's happened through the last time we recorded it, which would have been the end of January.
Okay.
Because we haven't finished February yet.
I just think it would be helpful, because it sounds, it sounds like the town council might not be seeing these numbers, and I know the Board of Ed is not quite understanding this. So I think if we could kind of roll off of the June 30th, 2022 audited financials, I'm specifically looking at exhibit C-2, you know, and maybe roll forward that, it might give everybody in this room a little bit of an understanding of where that 1.2 million is coming from. And Colleen, you brought up an excellent point. I'm assuming there's going to be at least a small piece on the town side, so we can see, okay, here's the Board of Ed side, here's the town side. I just think it would just be helpful to all of us to understand that if we actually had a schedule. Thank you.
Christina Porter.
Just to clarify, you just said that there's $2.7 million in the health insurance fund?
I don't know, it just net position end of the year is 2.6 million in the health insurance.
Is that
from the audited financial?
That's an audited financial statement. Our accounts are a lot, that's a broad, very large look at what it is. Our account has a lot of things where that money's not free, similar to whether you have fund balance.
But it's a reserve.
No, it's not a reserve. It has, that's where our claims come in, go out. Again, as I mentioned, we're part of Egypt. We're basically a health insurance company. So we have to make sure we can cover all our claims, whether they're now or 30 years from now. So whatever's in that fund, a lot of it's allocated to make sure we cover our expenses. Because if we don't have the money to pay the claims, then we're in trouble. So, and that's set all by Egypt, which Walt is actually the chair of. So he knows it's better. So we have to set aside a lot of funds to cover our expenses now and in the future. If God forbid Egypt folded at the end of the year, we still have to pay out claims that are current for as long as those go on. So it's not, that's a very 30,000 foot view of what the fund is. It's not just two.
So that's not the reserves, that's what was in there at that time.
It is, yeah.
Certainly it's changed since then.
Yeah.
Because that was, and I love your question, Colleen, that was a large reason, that one line item, why I voted no on this budget. Because I wanted to see actuals, I wanted to see the ins and outs of the funds, like no offense to anyone, but I like to see with my own eyes and not just hear things. So I did not trust that number, especially because we were in an anomaly, looking at the surrounding towns and other members of Egypt. So I would love to work with the town on if that is a one-time blip, perhaps using money from somewhere else to get this budget down and replacing reserves. I don't know, we got a million different funds, something. My only other question, you mentioned an administrator. Is this Cigna? Are they the TPA? For the
yeah, Cigna is, we have, yeah.
I trust them. But no, conversation's open. I'd love to get that number.
It is, it's very high. It's unfortunate. This is like, seems like one of the main drivers of your budget.
But, and also,
I mean, it's,
sorry to interrupt.
No,
I get passionate about it. Like, are we gonna add $1 million to our operating budget? That is just a one-time blip, right? Like, and I'm really struggling with that, and that's why I voted no. It wasn't because I supported all the cuts and all the, you know, that was really where I stood on this budget.
yes, I think it's high, but like if I learn more about the insurance and if it is just not here, you know what I mean? Like maybe there are other funds we can look into if it's gonna be.
Well, I think I think one of the things that we're dealing with is we've been very, very lucky in the past multiple years, like since you've been on the council, we have been at zero, below zero. So this is something we always deal with on a yearly basis. That's one of the reasons why former Steve Werner, you know, pushed to create this entity, because you get, if you're fully insured, you come back, you get a 15% rate increase, and there's nothing you can do about it. So that's why we pushed for this law and joined. So, and it is saved millions and millions of dollars for the town and Board of Ed over the years. But the last couple of years, since you say you've been on the council, we've been at zero. So we haven't, it hasn't even been an issue to talk about. But now, similar to other years, like before we went on it or some years, this is what happens. Health insurance is one of the big drivers, often if it's a high increase, because that's a big number for the Board of Ed in particular. So, but like I said, we've been at zero the last couple of years, so that hasn't been an issue. We haven't talked about it because it's just the same. It's the budget is the same.
I think just so that everybody gets a chance to speak, I'll go to Councilman Murray and then I saw the 20s and Vice Chair Legan.
So I wanted to start by thanking the Board of Education for all the work that went into this budget. I have been following along with all the meetings, as Mr. Holt referenced, reviewed meeting videos and minutes, and thank you, Colleen, for flagging for us when important meetings were going. That was very helpful. I wanted to start by asking for a little bit of clarification from one of the community questions. You know, this budget that's been submitted to us is higher than we've seen in the past. Lisa said that means our taxes are going to go up. But who makes the decision about our taxes going up?
The referendum.
The referendum.
The taxpayers of the town.
Right.
Well, what happens is, I'm sorry, I spoke without.
Sorry, she asked you, I would have said the same.
Okay.
You put the numbers at town council, gives
Right.
us direction. We put it out to referendum and the voters will decide.
So as of right now, there is no decision that has been made saying that anyone's taxes are going up in Tolland, right?
Certainly not.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify because I was a little bit confused by the way that question was answered. So my next question is directly about the Board of Education budget. Will this budget provide the same education services to our
Point of order, I'm sorry, Katie, but I think Tone, did you have a follow-up question to what I asked?
I was just gonna comment on.
Oh, so.
Well, no, I really want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak and go around the table before we have too many back and forth. People have a chance. So.
Thank you. Does this budget provide the same level of education to our children in the upcoming school year as they are getting in this school year?
Question for Colleen. You want to answer Ashley or Dr. Willett?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly can answer that. I know, Chairperson Munger, look like you want to, if you want to.
Go ahead.
I mean, you know, always what I try to do is provide a budget that maintains excellent educational services for the community of Tolland and students. Because there are some reductions in this, it would not have exactly the same level of service. So,
okay, thank you.
Sorry.
So if this is not a level services budget, why does it cost more than the current budget costs us?
Well, I think flipping the 1-2-pager back around, 97% of the drivers that although a huge number of our costs are going up significantly, and they're driven. We can't have 97% of that budget be part of that increase and not have to go up. We can't really control for transportation. We can't, we got a little bit of break on fuel diesel, but that's still, still up. Contractual obligations are all up. Special ed tuition up, and all that's really posted. We're not even really post-pandemic. I know most people have moved on from the pandemic. The school system is still deeply affected by the pandemic. So with the identification of special education, with the services that we have to provide now, all of these things are things that we really can't control. And so spending on those means not spending on other things. And it makes up really the majority of the budget. Salaries, the benefits, transportation, you know, the tuition, utilities, you know, these are all as illustrated on the line.
Thank you. The contract pay raises that are part of this second page. Are these the contracts that came before the board, before the town council, and we did not reject them? I guess is what happened.
So that I mean, that right, what the answer?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's probably in essence how we have to vote on the budgets, is voting not to reject them. After they've been negotiated.
So these contracted pay raises that we're seeing now, these are something that the board, that the town council has already, by not rejecting them, agreed to. Is that correct?
Yeah, through the work of, I think, the negotiating committee and the attorneys on both sides, and came to a resolution that the council unanimously approved.
Thank you, Steve. I love how you know all that stuff. What would a level services budget cost if we wanted, if the Board of Ed were going to provide the same level of services to the kids this academic year, in the next academic year, how much does that cost?
That I don't know the answer to, Dr. Wilson.
Another $1 million. We had reduced upwards get here about $600,000 to $1 million, so it cost about that. And to complement you, to complement the board and the council. You know, just to remind you that the average settlement in Connecticut for 58 districts was a 4.21%, and the Tolland teachers were 3.6%. So you did a great job there. The average settlement for administrators 3-year duration, that was 37 districts at the time. 8.71% was the average. The Tolland Administrative Society is 7.1%. So you've done a great job with the board and the negotiation chair. You've done an amazing job of making sure that there's good value coming back. It's just that there's these, you know, the dynamics of things they really could. They don't want that to have an impact on the quality of the support.
Thank you. We've heard for a number of years now that the Board of Education budget has built into it cost saving measures, cost avoidance measures. Can you confirm, can someone confirm that there are still going to fund these cost avoidance measures?
I can, yes, we are.
Yeah, because I think you even started saying that we have like 30 students in a lead program.
We are. That would be the last thing that I would ever recommend to you to fiddle with, because it is actually, it's the dam right now. It's actually the dam, you know, holding the proverbial water back here. If we didn't have those programs, these budgets would be much, much higher.
So are these cost saving measures adequately funded and staffed to help prevent expense spikes in future years?
I feel that right now the programs we have are reasonably staffed
and funded.
The LEAP, TTA, and ABA, yes. However, that the caveat on that is not to make any reductions in any lines. We're trying to fill positions because that would deeply impact our ability to execute this. So yes, as it stands right now.
Wonderful. How does this budget impact classroom sizes for each grade K through 12 in the upcoming school year?
So I do have on the budget page for the Board of Education for the district and Board of Education, there is a enrollment report. It's got all of the enrollment data. Right now, actually, the Tolland enrollment is starting to go up overall. I mean, overall, really, you're going to dip down for the next 2 years, but pre-K 5, you're heading upwards. So you'll notice over the next few years, fiscal year 23, you're at 2302. Fiscal year 27, you're at 2336 as a district, and it continues to rise from that point. So you are now heading in the next 5 years back upwards as an entire district in enrollment, even though over the next year or two, it kind of goes down slightly. You're headed back up as of fiscal year 27, and you're already up PK 5. So we really, in the next few years, need to be looking carefully at how we're going to manage that pre-K 5. Class sizes, if you look at the enrollment report, actually on the last page, you have class sizes in grades 1 and 2 of 22 and 23 kids roughly for many of the seven sections of each of those. And then grades 3 through 5, you see grade 4 class sizes increasing to 24 and 25 kids in some cases. Most of them are the 21, 22, but you've got some getting up there, especially in grade 4 of 25, 24, 25. And so those are not, they're not the 100, they're not what I would want to see as a broad plan, for the district. I think we need to be looking at where, how we're going to make those investments in pre-K 5 over the next few years to make sure our class sizes are reasonable for educational purposes while maintaining the crucial interventionists that are really, again, they're the dam holding the water back against the COVID learning loss that we're making a lot of progress against. And if you do look at our data portal, the data portal shows all of the progress that we're making. We're heading upward in virtually all the data points. So, and we do a great job with SATs in general too. So, you've got a great district here. You've got great things going on, great town staff, great school staff. But enrollment wise, we've got to keep a really close eye on that and make sure we make appropriate additions to, especially pre-K 5 as we go through the next year.
Thank you. Are there any grades that we anticipate seeing larger classroom sizes in the next fiscal year?
I would say that what we have in the enrollment report is more or less where I see it going. So, if you take a look at generally the NSDEC numbers, they're a little funny because our October 1st enrollment is usually the general snapshot we take every year. The February enrollment showed that between October and February, the district actually added 18 kids. That was out of nowhere. That increased our enrollment from last year to this year, this time. Actually beginning of the year to this point in the year at this time, we're 2320, 2302. But if you go across the board, our bubble really came in K. And that bubble is probably going to go all the way across the grades. Most of your K grades and incoming pre-K grades are going to be edging up again. So in the next few years, fiscal year 25, they're 162, fiscal year 26, they're 173, fiscal year 27, you're back into that 170 range. So you're going to be starting to see class sizes that used to be in the 140s, now in the 170s. And then I remember last fiscal year in our conversation, people were saying that 180 number, that can't be right for kindergarten. And I created an alternative, table just to show what that could be potentially if that were an error, but it wasn't an error. It was actually right on. We had 182 kids in kindergarten. So they're pretty accurate. These figures that we're looking at here are pretty accurate in terms of growth. And that, if we are able to maintain this budget, I think we'll have class sizes that we can work with, but we really can't be going backwards on this. We made a tremendous number of reductions already. I don't want any other impacts on any classrooms or interventions, interventionists or anything like that.
Thank you. Ms. Galchant pointed out that it's on page 12 of the Board of Ed budget, is the BOE budget 5-year and 10-year average. And this shows the changes to the Board of Education budget, I guess, in each respective year's dollars. I'm assuming these are not adjusted. Is there can you go through this, Dr. Willett, or whoever, maybe Steve, I don't really care who answers the question, and let us know for each of these years whether services were increased, decreased, or stayed the same? The money figure is one thing, but we're looking at a potentially much higher budget here with a reduction in services. So I'm wondering, from a 10-year perspective, how have we been doing in providing the same level of services to our kids year after year?
Yeah. Well, I came in 06 and the value of the dollar has gone down considerably. Over time, you have inflation, a number of things impacting the district. It's about a 2.5% for a maintenance budget typically. So, each year between a 2.5 and a 3, you probably have been running in a kind of modification reduction paradigm over the next past 7-10 years. The thing is that the game in Connecticut has changed a lot too. So when I came in here in 06, you weren't talking about cost of programs. Tolland generally would outplace students that they didn't generally feel fit. And so you'll notice districts across the state are any responsible district is working hard, or to the extent that they can. Some places are, difficult things that they're challenged with, they can't necessarily do this, but if you can, you need to create cost avoidance programs to survive. If you consider the numbers that we have in those programs now, we've made a shift to be able to address this so that you have much less going out than you would otherwise have going out. But over the past 10 years, you've probably lost about $3 to $5 million of resources overall. And if you look at how that works with inflation and the value of the dollar, you're not able to buy what you could buy with the dollars you had in the past. So there's definitely been an impact. When I was a principal here, back in '06, we had world language for all grades on team. So every child starting in 6th, 7th grade was learning Spanish, French. Now it was reduced one year to completely cut and then put back on a UA rotation. So it's really more exposure course now, and it's every other day. It used to be every single day, for every kid in those grades. So you've got things like that the district just doesn't have the resources to execute anymore. So over the span of decades, you have seen general reduction in resources. But I think your staff, both on the school and town side, has done an excellent job of making sure that we put into effect cost avoidance programs and so on to make sure that your impact is mitigated by those strategic moves to prevent you from having even deeper and more impactful circumstances. But definitely have had, many of us will remember, if you talk to teachers who've been here for a couple decades, they'll tell you there was a lot more resources. It's a difficult time. And yes, I could come up with that when you become full scope of it. But another example would be we had 8-period day, we had 8-period block schedules at TMS, which is a more costly thing to run, but it's an exponentially beneficial educational schedule structure to run, because you have these magnificent block schedules that you're able to use. When we had reductions a few years after I came in, it went to a 6-period schedule because we had no other options and not enough teams and staff to make it different. And that's a major difference in the structural, the ability for teachers to focus on kids in smaller groups of populations. It affected us deeply from that kind of service. We've recovered a little bit from that, but it is a big difference. So I would have to spend some time articulating why, because most people won't understand why going from an 8-period block to a 6-period non-block is, detrimental. So I'd have to link to some research, things like that. But yes, we could talk about how it's kind of degraded a bit over the decades. Tolland's not alone in that though. So I would say that compared to other districts, you hold your own, you have an excellent education system. That's not to my credit, it's to the credit of, people that are working, all your administrators, all your teachers, all your parents, custodians, staff, nurses, all of them. If I weren't here, you'd still have a great system. You have a great system, but it has taken hits over the last decade and 2 decades.
I was just wondering, Dr. Willett, if you're going to go through kind of all the cuts, if you will, over the last decade, could you also add all of the ads? I think that would be a really important thing to look at, because I can only talk from a parent and not as a Board of Ed member at what I've seen added to my children's education since 2005, when we first started in the school system. So I never had a child get all-day kindergarten. That's something that was an ad. So I just think that it might be helpful for a lot of times people talk about all the things we've lost. We've also added a lot. I don't remember any of my children having the opportunity for intervention when they were in the younger grades. I've hired private tutors because that was not available. So I just think it might be a good thing to, our district has absolutely progressed, and we've also had to change because some things have become more important and frankly, I think just better to have, like intervention, all-day kindergarten. There's a lot of talk about losing a language. And, I know my daughter, at least in kindergarten, never had a language. That was way before 2005. But that's a common thing that I'm hearing, is that all that we've lost, but what about all that we've gained? So that's just my question. If you're going to put together a list of all the losses, please put together a lot of the gains, the academies, all the UConn classes at the high school, APs, you know, that. So I just would like to see both. Thank you.
Yeah, and as I said, we've had to shift up how we are. Is some of what the script is speaking of there.
One-to-one technology. I mean, we kind of were forced into it, but that's huge.
Right, COVID, although in a large part of that was funded by the state, but we continue to fund it, which is.
But now we have to fund it.
Yeah,
So.
and actually to that point, you know, really, this is a board, you know, council, the Connecticut thing. The value of your dollars, you go back to 2011, you know, you probably are funding at a lower level with a greater, you know, numerical number of dollars, but the value of the dollars is less. So, you know, there's less spending power in there. And you've had a lot of unfunded mandates that, you know, are laid on the system. You know, you've had to make tactical moves to make sure that, you know, you have the resources when you speak of intervention. If you don't have those are required really under SRB, RTI, or what's called tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. If you don't have them, you'll have even greater special education designations. And as soon as you have those, that means almost immediate resource allocation. And that's a new resource allocation that is going in that direction and not necessarily in other directions. So, you know, it's a new game and it's a different environment than it was back in 06. No doubt it had all about that. But, you know, as an overall situation, you know, it's important to really know your dollars are you know, there's really not a net value increase from a dollar perspective and what it can buy for your school system. That's actually going backwards. And so that's just a situation you're in. You're not alone in that situation. But that's why it's very important to be very careful. You know, if reductions are going to fall now, we have to be extremely careful where they fall. And not be, you know, and listen to the people that are, you know, that you have hired to work for you to determine what's going to be devastating and what isn't, because, and not everything's devastating, but what's going to be the least of the evils. Because if we did, for instance, lose the interventions this group, you know, Griff was talking about, that's just going to have reverberating other effects for you that are negative and probably frustrating. So, you know, we've deeply thought out everything that we presented to make sure that, you know, we are steering the district and the town in a good direction to be good stewards.
Thank you, Dr. Willett. Councilor, are you amenable to maybe having Vice Chair Regan and actually have a couple of questions that we can go for a second round of council?
Sure, I'll hold. I just have one more. I'll hold it. Thank you.
All right, Vice Chair Regan.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, this is John Regan, Vice Chair of the Council. I do have a couple of concerns. The first one, well, I'll tell you straight up, I'm not the guy who's going to go through your budget and tell you to cut this and cut that. I don't see that as my role. But my first concern is we have a divided board, 5-4. If it's, you know, 8-1, 7-2, okay, 5-4, that's a concern for me. If I'm a voter out in the community, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, why is almost half the board against this budget? And that ties in with my second concern, which was laid out beautifully by Dr. Willett. February 8th at the February 8th board of ed meeting. I'm going to read something that he said, quote, "One of the worst things that can happen is for this budget and this referendum to fail multiple times or to activate a group that's going to vote 0 no matter what. There's a significant population who will come out with a no vote, and they are a chunk of the population, and you have to bring out enough people to vote above that. If that happens, we will see zeros, and we could potentially see failed multiple referendums. That is one of the most negatively impactful things that can happen to the educational system you're talking about," end quote. So my concern with this is I think that's where we're headed with a budget at this level. I think we're headed to a failed referendum, and then you're going to be forced to make some cuts. And I think it would be easier to do that prior to setting it out to referendum. I don't know what the number is that will pass at first referendum, but I've been around long enough to know that this number, I believe, is too high to pass at referendum. And then you're going to be forced to do things you don't want to do. And I guess the question becomes then, is there a plan for where you would go to reduce that budget if there is a failed referendum? Or is it just going to be a head? Or are there other areas where the board can look to make reductions? That's the question.
I mean, I'll start off. I mean, honestly, the one part of this budget that's a huge driver is the insurance. So if we could figure out how we can get help with that, try to make it so that we're not taking away student services, that would be very highly beneficial. Because if you look at that as 3%, ultimately our education is only 3%. You know, so to me, that's why I think the conversation that, you know, Colleen had started, and like I had said earlier, like we need to solve this insurance split, because even Floyd said if you have this in that, yes, then the students, the MBR goes up. Do we really need to have that when we have the insurance that's so huge and impacting this budget? That's my main concern. Like, how can we get help on that?
But that, I don't think that can happen prior to a budget referendum. So my question really is, where are you going to go? Where are you going to go to make a reduction? Is it just going to be a head count, or are there other areas? No, it's strictly head count.
I just wanted to add that I think we've already discussed our 5.96 doesn't mean that that's going to be what goes to referendum. We're not there yet. So I think a lot of us are hoping that the town can help assist with this before we have to go to that place. The other thing is that I can only speak to myself for myself as one of the 5, but my job as a Board of Education member is to decide what I think our students need, not about the number. So yeah, it's unfortunate that it's a number that everyone seems to consider to be a high number, but as we've discussed, 97% of that number is nothing that we can control. So now we're being put in a position to either ask for help, get us out of this situation, hopefully, or to now cut things that could be detrimental to education to our kids. I still have 2 kids in the system, so I'm a parent as well, and I have seen them lose things. My sophomore had technology teachers. My 7th grader that did not, K-5, they're now para-facilitated. That's one of the models we're sort of looking at for the library. Yet our librarians are media specialists. The PIS librarian teaches internet safety, teaches Google Slides, builds on what the kids are working on in the classrooms. Now we risk changing that. And instead of having instruction by a teacher, we have facilitation. So my response to that is that it's not about the number for me. It's about what we need. And that's what we had to start with. And that's what led me here.
Right. You know, nobody in this room and nobody online watching, I don't think anybody in the community would doubt that we want as much for our kids. We want them to have what they need. But what I'm seeing here is you're going to be forced to cut, because I don't think this will pass referendum. And again, I just don't know where you can go. I understand what you're saying, and I agree with everything. I still have a son in the school too. I have a recent graduate. So, you know, I'm kind of at a loss. I don't know what that number is, but I'm not really hearing an answer to my question. I'm hearing why you arrived at the number you arrived at. I get it. But I'm concerned that this is going to fail. And as Dr. Willett said, this very prescient comment that I read. I just think that we're headed for trouble, and I'd like to know if there's a plan, or if there's any kind of has there been any discussion around that, and what's it been, what's it going to look like?
Wasn't sure if you motioned your hand or if you were just suggesting.
Oh no, I mean, you know, that's you know, obviously in a context like this, I think that the trepidation is, you know, the minute one says, you know, sure, we have a plan, then they say, how much, and can we just reduce it by that amount? You know, that type of thing. So understandably, there'd be trepidation on that. It's my job to make, you know, to do my best with ultimately what this process, you know, this process yields. And I respect the process between the Board of Ed, Town Council. So of course the work is what's available, right? But at the same time, you know, I think you are looking at an extremely difficult year. There are some drivers, and you know, I'm concerned. So you know, I can understand why people are nervous about it.
Jake, were you looking to respond to that?
Yeah, I was going to answer your question directly. Jacob Mari, Tolland Board of Education, for those on Zoom. in terms of looking at alternatives for cuts, that were to be the case, we had discussions on February 1st and also the following meeting on the 8th where we voted to adopt the budget, discussing a menu of things to pick for possible reductions. Obviously, none of those are easy decisions to make. But if we had to go back to that, I would assume we'd probably revisit that list. Yeah, I'll reiterate the points around insurance. I think it would be great if we could continue to look into that, although I understand we need to be careful about that number. We don't want to get ourselves in trouble with it either. Yeah.
And I believe your comment was DOA for the budget, I believe, in that February meeting. So I think you're right. So I'm really struggling with this. So
yeah, I hate to say it, but I still have that same opinion.
Yeah.
Just there's a couple other hand raised hands like Tony and then Jane. Are you responding to John or just additional commentary? Okay.
And thank you, Mr. Reed, for that question. You know, one of the biggest dangers that I think we can get into when we start looking at these budgets is to look at it in a vacuum as a one-year event. That if we can just get through this referendum, then yay, we're great until next year. One of the conversations that we've been having, you know, for the past few years is looking at some of these things, some of these grants, you know, and next year, next budget cycle, when we start talking, we've got grants that are going to go away. So here, what we're saying here, our confidence that that insurance number is going to deviate up or down is we just don't know. So my concern when we went into a lot of these conversations, and I think like you were saying, and Ms. Murray was saying, you know, watching a lot of our meetings, was that if we don't start positioning ourselves now, then we're going to be having a very similar, if not more painful conversation in a year when we've already spent down some of these accounts, these reserves and these type of things. Like many of you know, I have a first grader. I am tied to this district and the excellent education that it has provided for at least the next 11 years. But my focus is in making sure that it will be that in 5 years, that we're not, by ensuring that we're putting the money and the resources where they need to be now, we're stabilizing the things that we need. We're moving some of the efficiencies where they don't necessarily have to be. The conversations that Dr. Willett was forced to go into for a lot of these was, okay, scenario, if we cut here, how do you do it without minimizing the effect to that student? You know, you look at some of the reductions that he had talked about doing some of the programs that we were reducing or looking at reducing. He was doing all of that in the effort to make sure that that kid sitting on the mat wasn't affected, that we weren't pulling away the teacher, that we weren't pulling away the book or the manipulator. So, you know, to the point he's making just a minute ago, do we have a plan if the number comes in low? No, but that's exactly why those meetings and those conversations and that vote went the way they did, is because there was a whole lot of concern about the very thing you're talking about here. In a real world where fiscal resources are limited, how do we still make sure that our children and our education are a priority? And that's a tough conversation.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you know, that makes me think of something because Jen, you mentioned it's not about the number, it's about the need. And I think all of us in here get it, and probably a lot of people online get that too. But there's a community out there that doesn't get it. It is about the number for the community. And that's why I'm scared that this is gonna fail. And I just keep going back to the same point, repeating myself, but that's where I am with this. It is about the number for most people out there. Not a lot of people come out to vote at referendum. And I think, you know, like Dr. Will said, you may wake some people up that think that number is too high, and then they'll stay awake following referendums. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen here. That's all I have.
And then I think, Jaden, you have a...
Yeah, just responding to John's question, I think it's a fair question. From that February 1st Board of Ed meeting, we received a list of cuts that would get us down to a 3.69 budget. And so I'd like to read through a couple of those positions. And Dr. Willett, I have a couple of lines that I had questions for you about just to get it out there. I think you just made a good point. Folks don't necessarily know or understand exactly what is in that number, which is, you know, what we should be talking about. What's inside of it? What are we taking? What are we giving the school system? So here's a TMS, THS math coach, TMS counselor. Dr. Willett, how many stipends are affected? If we were to revisit this list, how many stipends are affected in that team and grade leader positions, curriculum liaisons line?
Well, you got started with TMS, THS, the team counselor. And then you're kind of segue just to make sure I understand. Sure. If we want to slow. Is it, are you asking about stipends or asking about
just the stipends?
It's about $200,000 for stipends, and you're looking at about 40 to 60, depending on your funds.
So it's like I couldn't get it.
It's about there's curriculum liaisons, grade leaders, team leaders, and then there's so you're looking at about 40 to 60 people, depending on how many of those go or stay. And those are stipend positions that are about 2 things.
So 40 to 60 people that their stipends are being affected. The rope para position, THS custodian, THS business teacher, Birch Grove librarian, THS librarian, TMS librarian, nurse subs, and then there's a few other items that we discussed that, they're not heads, they're not individuals. And so I just wanted to make sure if there's a highlighted part that people are reading, what would be affected if we were to vote this down. That's just some. And so I hope that answers at least part of your question. Because again, I think unfortunately, and not to mention the child development course as well, and the teacher that comes along with that. And so that's just a few. And then you get into some of the ads that were removed this year. I mean, it'd be a hefty number. So I hope that answers part of it.
And that's why I'm fearful about losing all that stuff. And fearful that people are going to vote it down that aren't as up to date as we are. Stuff. That's what worries me. I appreciate that answer.
All right, so I actually just had a couple of questions, and then I think I saw Councilor Khan's hand up, and then we'll go for a second round of questions from councilors. So in terms of the budget, Dr. Willett, how is the education reserve fund being utilized? And do you think it's still, I think one kind of one of Tony's long term is that still a long term, is it adequate as a driver to help mitigate one-time costs for the school system?
Yeah, I'm very thankful. I think the state did that for a reason. Tolland was wise to incorporate that in its ordinances, and it's definitely a crucial tool. Right now, it's being used to offset technology. I obviously, I have many thoughts about operational things that we need to do, and that fund is a major strategy in solving some of those problems or addressing some of those temporary.
Okay, and then another question is, what is our current rate? It might be in the budget document. I apologize, I couldn't find it. What's the current rate of outplacement or students that are leaving the system for, cracks or technical schools or other systems?
It's about 200. Well, in terms of dollars, people going to Magnets Charter is about 200,000.
Okay.
And then if you're talking outplacements, you got about 2 million.
Okay, and do you think the budget has, as it is right now, does it provide any mechanisms to help promote? I haven't been to the movie theater in quite a while, and I decided to sit in and one and sat down, and the first thing I saw was Waterbury Public Schools with an advertisement. I had never seen that before, and then suddenly right after that was a CREC school. What strategies does the school system have to promote and promote all the excellent features I think Dave and other people have mentioned that we added on? I mean, even Christina that said that we've had ads that have modernized the school system. How do we promote that to the community so that they're not looking for alternatives?
Well, one of the most important things that we're doing is are the pathways programs. So we now go down when the kids are in 8th grade and do presentations on programming at the high school, engineering programming, business programming. As we expand those pathways, music, art, and dance, other potential pathways, medical and wellness, things like that. What's attractive about these schools in many cases is the children that are applying to them, they feel like they're getting something they can't get at home. And the money that the state's infusing in that system to try to solve certain problems, that's money that's not going to you. And you'll notice that we really can't afford to put our advertisements in the Rave movie theater that you saw, the crack magnet and all that. So one of our greatest efforts here is going to be around mitigating that and slowing the number of kids that would want to go to other schools, because they'll see in 8th grade in our presentation, wow, there's this really awesome engineering program at the high school. I get on that course of study, there's all these field trips and internal activities they do. And then when I graduate, I can have that added to my transcript when I go to apply to MIT as a distinction. And so we've already got those rolling in engineering and in business. We're looking forward to adding to that. That's one of our major strategies for doing that. And then looking, we advertise things on Facebook, we constantly publish videos of promotional activities. But really that child in 8th grade is who we're targeting right now to make sure they know what's available to them.
And just to follow up on that, because if we're talking about our pathways, then we are trying to get them up and running and make sure that all the students can take courses. On that list that Jaden had just went through, we have a THS business teacher that is on the list for the said cuts on the very first meeting. So yes, we're talking about pathways are positive. Well, we're already talking about taking a teacher away from that had, what was it, 3 economics classes that they teach, and go along with the other courses. So that's we're already chipping away at that. So just to make that clear to that point, yes, that's a positive, but then we're also talking about taking a teacher away from that.
And then one final question, obviously I think the insurance has been a very looming conversation. I think the other one that I think we can both Board and Town Council work well together on, I think, is advocating for more ECS funding. I think the state budget is obviously seeking to relieve taxes for residents across the state for their income, but what has the Board of Ed done, and what can we do to be better partners to advocate for more ECS dollars rather than this kind of general slope of declining ECS dollars coming back to Tolland? So I think that's another source of revenue that would help buffer the increases and the needs and those sorts of things.
Well, I think for the board side, the board is very active in CAVE, and CAVE has has lobbying efforts and has efforts with the state where they communicate the feelings and the contentions of boards of education towards making America a more fair ECS distribution funds. And I think that has been very active. The board's been very active. CAVE has been very active. Superintendents organizations like CAPS are very active in that. And fortunately, you have a state representative on your council. So you have an inroad right straight into that. And I'm sure that there's some advocacy going on there. So what's interesting is, UConn mustered 1,000 students to go to the legislature very recently by offering a free lunch and buses. Certain things that communities could get together to do is, a community like Tolland is getting kind of the short end of the stick on this. You really have been in a situation where it could be made, I think, more fair for you. Maybe we should think about collaborating with other communities and putting together some common drive down to our legislators they have over here. There's things that could add to some of the efforts that are being made. And really, though, at that the point that you're at, you're in a very good position with respect to your active board members, your active council members, and and the knowledge of what has to happen. And your organizations are also advocating. So, hopefully the governor will listen and things will shift in that direction. But the governor's budget didn't make all of these changes. So
I appreciate that a lot, and I think that's under council to definitely impress upon our town managers to continue working with our state delegation to represent the school systems as well as the entire town to help kind of revive some of the funding that we've lost gradually over the years under leaner budgets and leaner governors to get us in a better space. With that, I think Councilor Khan might have had a question, and we'll go for a second round. I'll start with Council Leader after that, Council Leader check, and then Councilor Luba, and then we'll go back to Councilor Murray.
Okay, one question. I'll put everything in one question. It's a nice budget. I like it. You guys want to give almost everything to our kids. I like it. But the only thing is, like, I know this insurance is about $1 billion, 24% going up, whatever it is, but what happens if it goes next year, just keep continuing that. Is there any other option for the insurance company? That's number one. I mean, can we shop around? I know it's a bit late, but whatever it is, but is there There's got to be some other options.
Well, there's always other options, but as I mentioned, we're a self-funded group. We joined that group. It has saved us millions and millions of dollars over the years. So if say we decided to leave, we'd have to go fully insured. So we'd still have the same claims, we'd still have all the increases, but we would have more fees associated with it. So the whole idea of being self-insured is that you're able to control costs better because you don't have more fees and more management oversight from a fully insured plan. So our claims are what they are. So whether we shop around or not, we would still kind of probably be in the same situation or worse.
In the past 5 years, you've been able to leverage a 0% 3 times. That's incredible. And so you have a tough year right now, but you've benefited from the arrangement you have from the self-insurance funding. I credit Steve Werner for that and some others at the time. You know, the town side, right on the ball with that one. It was brilliant. You benefit massively from your relationship with each.
Okay. I don't know much about it, but I'll take it. No other option. My second question to you is, whenever we talk about cutting budget or whatever it is, we always go at the bottom of the barrel that it changes everything else. Why don't we look at the top of the list that we're paying about, just the example, like any XYZ paying about $200,000 and compared to a generator, we pay them about $40,000. Why we have to cut down on the bottom? Change us whatever it is. So when
you're asking about
cutting the staff of teachers, whatever is bring direct contact to the kid, rather than the management side.
Instead of cutting teachers, why aren't we cutting other staff? Is that what you're saying?
I think like admin.
And I apologize, my hearing's not fantastic, so it's me messing it up here. So, well, you know, I believe one of the board members in a previous year did a little study of, I don't know, 30 or 40 districts. And you're not heavy on admin in this district. In this district, for instance, in my office, you don't have a curriculum director. You may have supervisors for 3 of your subject areas, but when I came from a prior district, we had them for all of your subject areas. You have them for 3. And there's no director. There's nobody for social studies on the administrative side of things at this moment. I try to cover that, and I do as best I can with that. So you're actually not overstaffed on the admin side, and they're absolutely crucial. Not one of them isn't doing massive things for the district. You're definitely much better off from a financial standpoint with the people you have in place doing the things you have them doing than if we were to lose them. Because what would happen is you'd have program lapses and collapses. There would be nobody managing those things. And I can't keep my finger by myself. I'm willing to work without a curriculum director and other things, but these other people, they are in crucial positions that are doing tremendous things for the district. And I could go through and read off, for instance, what supervisors do for curriculum, but we would be here for at least 20 minutes while I went into all of that. I'm happy to do it. I mean, I can meet with you afterwards or in another way, but they get grants for the district. They pay for themselves with respect to the things they're doing. And we have been able to move forward and have been able to make the advances we've made out of the COVID pandemic and learning loss because of these people in the program and they're doing. And there's only 3 of those people. And so it's really, we're getting great value from the people that are working here in those roles. And you lose a tremendous amount, probably end up spending more money without the people in the roles they're in right now.
Now, last thing is, as I said before, like the budget you're looking for is $2.7 million this year. What happens if the insurance goes up next year and obviously everything is going to go up, I mean the salaries and everything else, because everything else goes up. So this year, I know it doesn't matter what we talk about over here, it's going to be decided by 15% of people, 50% of residents, they will decide it. So, you know, I mean, as John said, your plan B for this year, for the next year, whatever it is.
You know,
I mean, it doesn't matter what you say or what everybody says or what I said. I don't think so it's gonna make any difference as a whole.
Yeah, you know, there's always a plan B. It's just what sacrifices do you want to make to get to plan B, you know, and that's the nature of the conversation you're having right now. And the board has grappled with, you know, what sacrifices would need to be made to do, you know, whatever budget is on the horizon for them. And, you know, they came to with the one they came to with for the reasons they have, and those are good reasons. I think that, you know, for me as a superintendent, you as an elected body with the board tell me what to do and I do it. Right, but that doesn't mean that if you came back and said it would be 0, to use Mr. Reagan's example, you know, that would be extremely bad for you as a community. And so, you know, but I would work with that. I mean, my job is to work with what you give me. But that's
I'm not giving you a number, neither anybody else giving me a number, amount, whatever it is, but it's going to be decided by.
My job is to. But yeah, we've talked, you know, the board has deliberated and talked a lot about what, you know, what the considerations are. And I have all the faith in the board that they would be able to do what they have to do. But I think they are communicating to their sentiments about why they do it. And I support them, you know, all of it. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Consi. I'll run for the second round. Councilman Yudacek, followed by Councilor Luba and Councilman Burke.
I ever probably more than the first time because I didn't get finished my other questions.
Okay.
The first time around, so there councils that I work with know I little notes along the way, so sorry.
Not there to kick you, so.
I know they separated the next time. Sorry. I followed, like I said, the meetings, and I know, John, you had touched base on the split vote. As long as I've served, I've never seen such a split vote. I think I can understand some of reasoning. But I think, Christina, you mentioned it was partly because of the insurance line. You don't believe in all the cuts. That's what it sounds like. It's more the money, that big number. So I guess my question, if I can turn it around, if the town could help with that number, would it be a vote been different? Like, say if the town would be like, we can help you with 100,000, 200,000, whatever number it is, would you have changed your mind knowing that we could assist a little bit lowering down that number? If that makes sense.
Potentially. I think it was more I had asked for, you know, the financials ins and outs of the fund and truly understanding where that number came from. You know, there was a report that there was only 2 of the 12 pages posted publicly. You know, we got the emails, but, you know, I like to see, not hear. So it was more around lack of faith in that number.
I mean, I don't know if like each one of you guys could just,
but that was me. I can't speak for
no, I know, like, I know Christine, you're one of the finance. I mean, you're really a numbers person, so.
I guess for me, a lot of it was I didn't feel that as a board, we really did our due diligence. Like, we barely talked about that insurance number. We didn't request more information. We didn't request to have something from the town. And I had a very hard time with that. We looked at the cuts that Dr. Willett proposed, and that's all we talked about. We didn't talk about really any other non-student affecting possibilities. So for me personally, I just didn't feel that we did a good enough job in looking at the superintendent's proposed budget. I felt that we just rubber stamped it and we pushed it. So in all honesty, that was the biggest reason for me why I couldn't vote yes for this budget.
And just respectfully, I think Scrip has done a great job as the FFC chair. I would respectfully suggest that, you know, if you go through those questions, there are 60 some questions. There are very many that were added by Scrip, which I appreciate. And so from the standpoint of people rubber stamping, I can guarantee you that I don't feel rubber stamped. I feel definitely run through with a series of questions both on that sheet and off of it that really went deeply into everything and anything, and and did not just go at all to staff. So any errors or trepidation in what I offered, understandably, that's my thing, my doing to this board as they deliberated. But I feel very strongly that this board did a lot of hard work, asked a lot of questions, and either me meeting with people one-on-one or going into that budget. If you look at that Q&A doc, most of those questions are not about staff. Some of them are, but there's a lot that aren't. And they are expansive questions with detailed answers. So I think the board did a very good job, all of them, including Ms. Griffin, and not Ms. Griffin, who serves down the back of the budget she's asking. I really do think the board did due diligence. I think it just came down to, and there were some board members who were unhappy with me with the things that I put out there, understandably, because it's a process that's difficult when we're talking about things. We have to sometimes throw out on the table when we're talking. So I really do feel like this board did a great job of chewing on everything they could, and this is where we are. And so ultimately, I respect the process and the decision of the board and council. But I do think that they did, including the scrivener. So.
I guess.
Are we going around?
Yeah, either.
Well, so just to touch base on what you said, to check. No, because in my opinion, that insurance number is, but it's also the boogeyman. It's the thing that everybody is focused on and everybody has talked about being the problem, which it is an issue. But Councilman Murray touched on it earlier when she was looking at some of the negotiations that we've done and said that and they're modest, and reasonable increases, but they're increases. Each one of these we've gone into have come out with an increase. The transportation has been an increase. The fuel, that every conversation we've had during this, we talked about the increase. I don't feel like we went into it enough and said that other side of the ledger, that if we've got these increases, where can we start looking at reducing without having significant negative effects? To Dr. Willett's point, the questions did approach that. Some of the options back, I know you were looking at a graph that we had in one of our meetings that talked about those type of things, not necessarily saying where can we slice this budget, but saying that a budget, at least in the conversation, has to be a balancing act. And if we're going to continue to add here, at some point, we've got to start taking away on the other side to maintain and to keep it in control. Otherwise, to Mr. Regan's point, we're going to get forced to make decisions that we don't want to make. So we've got to somehow keep it reasonable and maintain our focus now. And I don't think the number that we pushed forward did that.
Oh, yeah, okay. I think there were going to be too. No, so I think Mr. Regan covered some of why, I did not support this budget. During this process, I was one of the few board members to ask Dr. Willett to come up with some proposed reductions to get the number down a bit. And I favored some of those reductions, in my opinion, and as Mr. Regan, multiple referendums is not the scenario that anybody wants. It's not only is it a lot of work for our elected bodies, but it really is bad for our town and school employees who have to live with all that uncertainty. So that was a big concern for me. I think that if we look at the number and realize from the get-go that it's really high, and we're going to need to get it down, it's better to start doing that January, February than June 30th. The other thing in terms of the insurance number, I would, if we could sustainably, that's a key word, bring down that number, I would rather reduce that than anything on this list. But the key word there is sustainability. If it looks like there's a chance that it could be 15% next year, then I can't be in favor of borrowing money today because we're just going to be in the same boat in the future. That's all.
Thank you. I think, and then obviously I know why the rest of you guys really is. So, to Dr. Willett's thing with the admins, I know that's always a concern with Lucy. I mean, because they get paid so much, would you rather sacrifice
teachers versus admins. When I was on the board, I was probably part of most of making the decision to hire them because they are such a necessity to the school system. I mean, you know, but how do we get that across to the public? Like, what do they do? It's so hard. You got this number and nobody knows what that number is. They just hear it's huge. But I think they're worth every penny. But again, John, you mentioned it, it's not up to us how to tell them to do their budget and but I mean, everybody in our school system are very lucky to have. Then we have a couple more questions. So I guess now that it's passed, even though it's split, I would hope that you would still somehow support this budget, your number going forward. Like last year, you guys Board of Ed put a budget through last year, and I felt like the council did all the work for the referendum. Like, are you gonna support this budget and go out and explain to the community why we need what you're asking for? I mean, it's a lot of work. I don't want field referendums. We had a field referendum last year. We put forth a really good one. Some people got helped by it. So just want to know how you're going to help support this going forward if the number, whatever the council decides, that makes sense. I don't know, John or Jaden or Bea or Ashley, like, how are you gonna explain to people then how bad we need this?
I mean, personally, you know, this goes back to why I do support what Dr. Willett had put together. And once we looked at the list of the items that were going to be cut, like, I'm not comfortable sleeping at night thinking, okay, I'm okay with these cuts when those are opportunities for our students and staffing with our students. So to me, I think we did go through a list of questions. We had, what was it, up to 60? Was it just 60 or 63, I want to say? 64. So 64 questions going through this whole process. So I do feel as though we have gone through the ins and outs. We've had those conversations, and I did not like where those conversations were going. And me as an individual, as a parent, I need to be able to sleep at night. So I had to vote my conscience. So what I feel is appropriate for the school system. I'm still hanging on to amount because it really is a huge driver in what that percentage is. So if there's something at all like reserve or anything, I understand where Jacob's coming from. I don't know if we can look at what the trend was before. I mean, I hear zero coming out before of what that cost basis is. Is there something that we can use? Do we have a reserve that we somehow can use to go to what the trend is typically? I mean, I do worry that the insurance, I think even Sammy had said that sometimes the costs go up and it goes up. But if this is a blip of a typical year, like, I just still feel like there has to be something that we can do in order to make the numbers work. That's where I'm coming from.
Are you responding to?
Yeah, because you said each part.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to hear from each board member that how they voted or how they're going to support it. What, you know, I think that's important for people that are listening too. And, yeah.
So I'm going to echo a lot of what Ashley just said, but I think, you know, we keep talking about referendum. For me, as a Board of Ed member, my first step is coming to you guys and asking you for help. So I'm not at the part yet where I ask the community to help with a number that we don't know yet. I'm here hoping that you guys are going to help offset this, because again, come back to the insurance as our prime example. I don't think we should let a one-year blip for kids. I think we should figure out another way. We should watch the trend and see if it really keeps going up or if we really are in the blip, which to my understanding we've been here before. Maybe not at this high number, but we've had higher numbers before. So then secondly, yes, of course, I'm going to support any number that doesn't take away from what I think our kids need. And I've already responded to most of my emails that we've received from parents to please share their thoughts with the town manager, the town council. Because again, you guys are the next step in my process, in this process. I forwarded you guys the 3 letters that we got from students. I hope you received them. So I'm on the path. We're here tonight. And yeah, I hear what a lot of people are saying, and I respect it, and I really appreciate how it's being posed to us very respectfully. But I hear the backlash from the other side. I hear the parents that are saying, why does this town not support education? So I think that if we don't give the community a chance to weigh in here, we're going to get that backlash. And these are the parents. We've had our staff come to public and gotten notes from them, telling us to please not get creative and continue to allow them. So yes, I'm going to continue to support not eroding our budget or eroding our kids' education in whatever way that looks like.
You don't mind, yeah.
I'm not going to call.
Just meeting. You're in my blind spot, so like.
I think it's very important that we all remember that 97% of this increase is attributed to cost factors that are out of our control and that we've already agreed to. So it's not that the board hasn't done their work, they're not willing to do their work. I mean, we're just at this place. We're 97%. That's a huge number of this budget. And I think that needs to be conveyed to the public, that these increases are not directly, they're not negotiable. So the rest of the percentage is what we really need to focus on to get to our children. And yeah, I definitely support this budget, and will do whatever is asked of me to support this budget.
Everything they just said. Plus, just yesterday we had a great curriculum meeting, and part of the discussion in that curriculum meeting was creating more pathways. And what is one of the main reasons Tolland schools would create more pathways? Well, my best guess is for competition's sake. We've got students who are, and I mentioned it yesterday on the meeting, I've got one in my house, my sister, who's looking to go out of town to get her half her day, her education. And so if we were to supplement that here, if we were to provide that here, would we have to, outsource our students other places? And so I think everything they just said perfectly, adding competition to that. And that's sort of why I'm at where I'm at. I think the number, we had bounced between 75 million different numbers, between 5.97 and 3.69, whatever it was. And I think for me, it was the discrepancy between 5.9 and 5.1, which was, I think, the second option. There were 3 options. I don't remember the exact number, but it just wasn't enough for me. And it created a lack of, again, ability to compete with other towns and other districts. So that's my best answer.
Yeah, I remember you were struggling with that, Jada, because I think I have the numbers. Option 3 was 4.58, option 2 was 5.05, then 5.97.
Right.
Jada was closer to the one a little bit in the middle. I remember, right? But anyways, I remember you were really struggling with the difference, because what was that difference between the 5.97 and the 5.05?
Well, every percent is every percent is about 400,000.
Okay. Okay. I think that's really all. Oh, Dana. Hey, Dana.
My apologies, Dana. I recognized you before, and I
That's all right. I didn't want to just chime in or yell at anybody. But I just want to say, I think that a lot of the conversation is everybody's talking about as a number, and I get it, because that's the end all be all when it goes to it goes through the process, right? But the reality of it is, and again, I think one of my very first Board of Education meetings, one of our constituents and an actual council member on one of our boards and commissions, advised the Board of Ed that we're guardians of education, and we need to ensure that we're guardians of education. And I think Jen spoke eloquently about what our students need and what our staff needs and what our school system needs. And that's truly what we've tried to craft with some of our budgeting process, with what to facilitate that and to execute that. We can't change the spot that we're in. We can't change that we're coming out of COVID. We can't change that grants and different things are leaving us, or they're expiring, or their time has spent. But we can, look forward to see what we can do to maintain and sustain. So yes, through the last 20 plus years or 10 plus years, have we cut programs? Absolutely. And the last 10 or 20 years, have programs been added? Absolutely. One-to-one was added. Yes. In the face of the pandemic, one-to-one was added. That's something that we need to sustain because it's the right thing to do for our kids. But I want to bring it back to the 97% of the budget increases, that the increase on our budget is something that's contractually obligated to our educators, our paras, other folks within our school district, that was actually gone through the process through negotiations, that went through the process through the Board of Education to approve, that went through the process of our town council to approve. So the 97% of what is a part of our increase has been approved by, whether it be members of the board, all the members in this room, or if there was the previous board and you're new to the town council, nevertheless, they were approved by this team that's sitting in this circle in this room. So we have to be cognizant of that. We also have to be cognizant of the power and I don't want to say power, but the impression we can make on our community members by saying we're scared, we're this, we're that. I understand that we have to think realistically, and we need to think forward thinking as well as where we think we're going to go, but we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know. But what we do have is folks that have been involved in our town, whether it be town council, Board of Ed, commissions, liaisons, all of that, they can speak intelligently about our processes that we have in place through the budgeting process, through the referendum process, through our taxes, through our mill rate, and make sure that we are educating the community that it is not going to be a 5.97 increase on our mill rate or our tax increase. It's a 5.97 budget for the Board of Education, which is, I think someone asked in the very beginning, is 75 to 80% of the town's budget. But what is that? Our largest asset in our community. And if we can't fund our largest asset in our community, then what can we fund? Then other parts of our community get eroded as well. Because we just need to ensure that we're placing our time, our money, and our taxes well spent on areas that will help our community flourish. And if it's not our largest asset, what is it? I will say, I feel that we did a lot of our due diligence through this budget process, dating back to the beginning of September we talk about this year's budget going into next year's budget and next year's budget, but the budget process started back in September of 2022. We had meetings with the town. We had meetings with the superintendent. We had workshops. We had the budget Q&A for the public. We had the budget Q&A for the Board of Education, hundreds of questions put in there, and that we had our staff, Dr. Willett, as well as his resident experts answering those questions on how we can be more efficient, how can we sharpen our pencils, how can we streamline, how can we look at different things that we can maintain and sustain. So I think, the reality of it is we have to look at what that calendar was. We have to look at the meeting after meeting after meeting after budget workshops, talking to our educators in our budget workshop at Tolland High School, saying, please don't make us be creative. We're already trying to be creative. We have kids in classrooms that are 25 plus. We have the bubble, I think it's the 8th grade bubble, I think it's the fifth grade going into sixth grade. That's another bubble. The reality of it, our class sizes are not getting smaller. And I just think that we really need to make sure that our influence can be utilized and the teamwork that can be put together with these boards to educate our community on what this really does mean and what it really does mean to our educators, what it really does mean to our students, what it really does mean to our staff, and how we can help support to continue these programs to grow and flourish and do what's right by our community overall. So to answer your question, Colleen, I support it. I feel that we did do our due diligence. Do I understand that the number is high? Absolutely. Do I understand how we got here? The pendulum swung. We're now dealing with it. And we can't keep, as everyone says, kicking the can down the road. The reality of it is if we don't take care of it now, it's just going to keep bleeding and there's going to be opportunity for bigger and bigger problems down the road. So I just think this is the right thing to do by our educators. It's the right thing to do by our students and staff. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, so I think Councilor Luba and then Councilor Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to address some things that have been brought up. One of the things is that we were saying about the ECS, where we need to petition the ECS. Bottom line is here, based upon even the information that Dr. Willits put out, Tolland ranks number 30 out of 169 in towns in the within the state of Connecticut, as far as median income. We could have all of our legislators, state reps, state senators, all of them vote for it. We're not getting it. We're not going to get an increase. With that number, there's no way, and we should not rely upon that. We can petition all we want, but the reality of it is that it's going to be very difficult for us to be able to convince the state to give us any additional funds for the ECS funds. So we shouldn't plan on that. The other thing is that everyone's been going back to the point of a lot of these, like 97%, these are costs that we can't avoid. Well, let's remember that when we're going into our contract negotiations, because when I first came in, I still remember the meeting that we had in one of the small conference rooms where we got screamed at because we weren't agreeing to a 9% increase in the contracts for teachers. And that I stated specifically inside there, John and Steve were both there as well when we were addressing this issue, that whatever you get now, you have to remember that you've got to pay the piper at some point. And we're not paying the piper. That we agreed to these increases, and yes, that they went through the whole negotiation process and that they got through, but I remember specifically, we were told, you either take this now, or if you go to mediation, that you could possibly get higher. And my statement was at that time, well, then we need to be able to find a way to make sure that when these things come due, when the insurance comes due, when the raises come due, when all these things come due, that we have a way to make sure that we can account for them inside the budget. We're now faced with that fact that we have to deal with that. And that now and I respect the Board of Education because they're coming here and they're doing their job. They are voting their conscience and they are promoting what they feel is best thing for their role as members of the Board of Education. As a town council member, I have to take a look at that as well and see what's best for the town. And really what I hear a lot is, well, can't we have the town do more to help us out to offset these costs? The town right now, the breakdown is 30%. The overall town budget for what we have control of, apart from the Board of Education, is only less than 1/3 of the overall budget. So for us to try and find additional ways to save money is basically saying you get 1/3 and you need to find more from that 1/3 to give to these other 70% to offset the costs, which is something that really we can't do because then we're looking at cutting other services that affect not just the students, but the town and the residents overall. So that's something that I find very difficult to do. That the overall issue here is that we have to take a look where historically, taking a look at the past 10 referendums, we have never gotten a referendum approved more than 3%. I think last year was the highest that we got in the past 10 years, but before that. And we're in a much different position than we were 10 years ago. 10 years ago, Tolland was flush, budget was good, great, things were going well, that we were in a great financial position as a country overall. We're not there. That everybody is hurting. Everybody's in a curse across the board. Inflation is killing people. everything is, the cost of living is overall is great. While I understand that we need to support our educators because they're feeling the same pain, that realistically, we are not going to get a budget, no matter how hard we advocate for it, that's going to go above a town budget of 3% increase. Historically, it bears out. And, you know, I think I hate saying disingenuous because I know you're voting your conscience and that you're doing what you're advocating for the school and for the Board of Education. But it's disingenuous to come in with this almost 6% increase, knowing that we're never, that even if we go with that, no matter how much we cut the town budget, that we could leave the budget flat for the town. And we're still going in with then essentially you know, by my calculations, at least a 4 to 5% increase overall. And that's not going to. And so I'm going to tell you that as it is right here, right now, I can't support this budget. I can't support the BOE budget on this. And it's going to be a lot. And I'm just being honest. I've always been one where I've always said I will always be honest, whether you like it or not. And that's what it is because I know that going into this, no matter what we do in the town budget, we will always come in before more than a 4%. And that's not going to pass, no matter how hard we advocate. I wrote last year advocating for the first budget. I did all I can to try and get people to vote for it, and it got shot down. You know, so looking at the history of it, no matter what we do, unless there comes in a lower rate and something else, that it's not going to pass, no matter what the town council does, no matter how many people advocate for it. That's just the history of the town. And that again, what I'm asking is, no matter what we do, let's remember this pain right now. When we're looking at trying to cut the budget with that 97%, when that's something that is built into the raises, built into the salaries, built into all the benefits. So when we come back to the next time that we're going to discuss the contracts, which I think are coming up in another year or so, that we keep this in mind, so that we know that, hey, if we're going to do this, we need to find other ways, other places to cut. Because we didn't do that. We haven't done that. And that's why we're now facing this hard reality of where, holy cow, 97% of our budget for the Board of Education is non-negotiable. Well, gotta have to find it some way. We always have to pay the piper. And that's what, I mean, this is more of a statement than it is questions, but that's really where it is. And that's one thing that I ask all of us to remember going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just want to share anything for
Yeah, I can just respond to Councilman. So regarding the contracts and negotiations fee, so I recognize that you're talking about a 9% that was before my time and the situation that was around that. So this time we would have been in the same boat. We would have, if we didn't do what we did, we would have ended up in mediation. But the biggest reason for that was because we were well below the state average. If you look at page 13 and 40 of the budget book, Tolland compensates their teachers in the bottom half of the third in 10 out of 12 considerations. And I won't go through some of the specifics. We did in the meeting. We did with the Board of Ed and we did with the town council. How can we expect to keep our good teachers if we're not paying them fairly and competitively? And how can we expect to attract new talent to come in and be a teacher in this town when they could go to neighboring districts and be paid more? No, I don't think that we should go into contracts and negotiations meetings with the mindset of, if we give you fair and competitive compensation, I'm cutting librarians next year. That is not what we're supposed to do. That is not what we did. And I don't think that we should do that going forward. How are these other towns paying their teachers more? How are they cutting all of their other programs in order to compensate them fairly? And again, fairly being lower than the state average in all of the negotiations we've done so far.
Well, with regard to that, we have to also take a look at the tax base. We are 95% based upon residential property tax. All these other towns, you compare these other towns with, as far as what they have, and take a look at their rate as far as how much is property tax and how much is actually comes from business and other taxes. That's where it gets offset. That's where the surrounding towns have it offset. We don't have that luxury. We don't have that luxury for the businesses or other tax bases. We are a primarily residential tax base, and that's where we have the issue. And again, I understand what you're saying, but the one thing that is the issue here is that knowing that and seeing historically that, you know, unless there's a, you know, we're just a unicorn year where we're going to be able to, you know, with the town people finally say, hey, yeah, look, we're ready to approve this, that if it goes above 3%, it's not going to pass. And so we are now put at the point where we either have to cut back town costs, which is again only 30% of the overall budget, and cut town services that affect the town overall as well, to offset the expenses for the Board of Education, or we go in with a budget that, you know, I really think nobody here believes is going to pass on the first referendum. I would challenge anybody to prove me wrong on that. We could advocate, all of us here could advocate saying, we believe in this budget, we want this budget to pass, but no matter what, history's proven that's not going to happen. So we need to go in with a realistic basis. And the other thing that is an issue is that the budget that we have every year, whatever we set as a bottom line budget here. So we could give you the say it passes, we agree to a 6% increase, and you get that 6% increase, so whatever 5 point whatever percent increase. That's the starting point for next year's budget. And that's how it goes. And that's one thing that I think that the town people don't understand as well, is that whatever we set as a budget this year is your minimum starting budget next year. That's what I'm saying. We need to start planning ahead, because we are kicking it down the road. Because every year we come back with the same thing where, you know, we need this. And if you take a look in the 4.5 years that I've been on the town council, that the overall Board of Education budget, I believe, has been raised somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 12% from when I first began. I mean, I don't know, but that's something that, taking a look at it overall, you know, every year we start out as at that new number. And so if the 3% increase last year, that's a new start, and we had a 3% on beyond that. So compounding that interest, again, I'm not a mathematician, that's why I went to law school, you know, because I hate numbers, but you know, it's something that, looking at it overall, when we take a look at how much we were, you know, 4 years ago, 6 years ago, and where we are now, every year we start out at that new spot. So it's something that we need to start being cognizant of and start planning appropriately. But I appreciate what you're saying, and I understand. I mean, I struggle with it as well. I want to get talent here. I want to keep talent here. But at some point we have to try and find that. We're not, you know, I don't know what the answer is. But it's something that this town, because of the base that we have for the taxes, because that we are mainly residential tax base, they're not willing to go above that 3%. And I don't see that getting better. And so we now have to sort of really realistically take a look at where we can go with that and start with that 3% budget going forward, like we try and do, with that understanding, and say, okay, what can we get for that 3%, and not shoot for the sky all the time. I think that's great, but you need a realistic budget going in and saying, here's what we want, here's what we're going to ask for, but here's the bottom line, because we know this is what's going to pass. And I think that's something that I agree that, you know, we all need to start looking at, all of us here for the budgets, saying, this is what, you know, let's take a look at realistically if what it would look like, with knowing that we're going to be getting in at a 3% increase. And that's just me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry.
Can I continue to respond?
I just don't want to go too much into a back and forth.
Yeah.
You know, obviously you want to respond a little bit further, but I just want to make sure that Councilman Murray's been waiting for.
Make it really quick.
Yeah,
sure.
So I totally respect what you're saying too, and the position that you're in. That's a town problem. But I think the town's also going to have a problem if we continue to erode our education, because who's going to want to live here? And I think we're seeing some of that already. I recognize the position you're coming from. I'm also coming from a position of a decade of volunteering in the schools weekly, if not daily at times. So I'm coming from a place of experience of being with the students and with the staff. And my network is parents. And I think that parents are very concerned about our education and the budget. And you don't have to, or again, we're gonna go back to the point I keep making. We keep talking about referendum. We haven't decided what that number is yet. So, or you haven't decided what that number is yet. So I'm perfectly happy with you not passing a 6%. If you're willing to help out the board so that we don't have to cut services that are going to take away from our kids' education.
I'll make a very short point about, I appreciate the comments that have been made. And I also love the fact that this group, just to compliment all of you, talking about all of you having your conviction of doing what you believe is in the best interest of people of the town, even if you disagree, I think it's awesome watching you work. So thank you. It's great to work here and see that. One thing I would say, I just want to caution, to look at your data, out of 58 districts, your teacher settlement was lower than the average. And when you have that and you look at your positional compensation data, I want to compliment you on making logical choices with respect to your approval of contracts. Because when we do make these decisions and we work in due diligence negotiations, we are under the advisement of, groups like Shipping and Goodwin and others who tell us we will lose in arbitration. You will spend more money arbitrating it and you will have less after the fact and be in a worse position. So I just want to make sure that I, put it out there that you've made good decisions, Council and the board with respect to your approving contracts that are negotiated below the average and then the compensation position that you're in. Those are not bad decisions. And it's not an abdication of your diligence. I think it's an indication of diligence.
Christine. Sorry, I know you wanted to go.
I was trying to, no, I was trying to say, because I saw both hands go down. I wanted to go flip one to the other and then.
I just wanted to address a few things. Lou, you had said, we were asking for your help with the insurance. I wanted to clarify what I meant by that. Not on the town side in regards to your operating budget. If we're replacing reserves, I would see no problem taking money from some fund balance. I don't know if that would work to replace reserves in another fund, but not insurance operating costs. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And that's up to the powers that be that would be in charge of that. I want to address Colleen's question because I didn't get to answer. I like low budgets. I love low budgets. You should see my whole budget. So I'll leave it up to Lisa and our town manager to make it work, but it depends on what that final number looks like, because I'm that person that always puts it off. Now I have a seat at the table, and I think I advocate for a lot of parents that recognize, 2 kids in daycare and this and that. Everything's going up. Yes, I want my kids to be well educated, but I also think Griffin touched on it. We have a great school system and we have a lot to be grateful for. A lot of our teachers, I think they make great money. I have a friend in New Haven that's taught for 20 years that makes less than our starting teacher. And I know we're in different dirt, but I'm just saying, an attitude of gratitude would get us a little. That's it. Thanks.
Sorry, Christina, for asking you. I apologize.
Oh no, it's okay. You probably assumed I was a no.
No. Oh, I almost
No.
Sorry.
No. That's over.
I have a question. I was hoping I could direct directly to Dr. Willett, and I want to direct it to Dr. Willett mostly because Mike Wilkinson mentioned that Dr. Willett's chair of ECHIP. And have we seen previous spikes in insurance that last multiple years? I mean, should we be expecting this to last multiple years?
I think, again, I compliment you for being involved in it. I think Steve Berger's genius was involved in getting you here. And you have a great, great system. It's very helpful to you as a community. In my experience, about every 3 years, you have a blip. It's pretty bad. That's kind of how I see about in my estimation, 3 years, there's a blip upwards. So, you're set up very positively to be able to handle those blips because of how ECHIP's been set up to support you. So being self-funded is crucial for you here. It's been extremely beneficial. And you do have blips, you know, and I've seen them about every 3 years. You have one of these significant upward blips.
Thank you. One of the major focuses that we talked about a year ago with the Board of Ed budget was a focus on social emotional health. A lot of that in response to the pandemic. And we've heard this on a state level as well. The social emotional health that our kids need is pretty intense. And I'm wondering, you know, it's been a year since we've had this conversation. If, you know, the Board of Ed members would be able to highlight some of the advances in social emotional health and how if it is going to continue into the next fiscal year.
No, can you like to speak about that?
Yes, I think Dr. Willett can do it more eloquently, but we do have an SEL committee. They are doing fantastic work.
I'm sorry, what's SEL?
Social emotional.
Awesome, thank you.
And it's comprised of people from all the schools who volunteered. I've been lucky enough to sit in on a lot of those meetings, and they're putting together a fantastic curriculum. I think they're going to start. They're going over it in PD days, right, Dr. Willett? And then we'll be working on a charter as well.
Right.
So we have begun that work. I think Dr. Willett is.
No, I think you did a great job, Scott. So is a member of our steering committee for social emotional learning in the district. But she's been a great, very helpful member, and always keeping us on our toes and making sure the district is moving in the right direction. I appreciate her for that. Right now, we have spent the first part of the year with teacher teams developing lessons and plans for creating the school-wide charters, the district charter, and what's called meta moment lessons. And these are all part of the Yale Ruler program. So we are tethered and anchored to a quality program that's data and that has great data. And so they've, they're in the process of creating, and these are kind of catchwords for SEL if you ever look them up into the Yale program. The blueprint, the meta moment, the charter. So the first part of the year was developing these lessons for other teachers so that we could do a spring training. And now we are in our spring training. So we'll be able to implement a full rollout of SEL next year for all kids in all grades. And the trainings are specific to they are designed to be mindful of the developmental level of the child. So kids that are in high school will be doing slightly different version of it than kids say they're in kindergarten, because obviously they're going to be at a different place. So it's in a good place right now. A lot of hard work's gone into it, and I think we're doing great.
And this budget, thank you, Dr. Willis. This budget, the proposed budget before us, will allow those efforts to continue.
Well, one of the most important things about it is, we do spend money on what we call curriculum development, and this is an example of that. SEL is a curriculum. It's a social emotional learning curriculum and pacing and so on. And so, that's very important in terms of sustaining a reasonable and healthy budget for the board. If the board had the impact of significant detrimental cuts, we would have a very hard time executing SEL. Because right now we are able to do this for far less than what it would take to be involved with the Yale program more than we already were. We sent teams of teachers to Yale's online Zoom program that was offered at a much reduced rate. Those teams came back, and these are the teams helping us develop these trainings and lessons right now. So we're getting it at a much reduced rate than if we were paying Yale for that same training. But we do have to pay these teachers the curriculum rate to execute this. And if we took significant hits, that would put us in a very precarious position, because a lot of times our curriculum programming goes a little negative as it is in order to get, to keep everything where it's supposed to be. So we really don't have much leeway with respect to that. It could hurt our ability to continue to implement that program if we had, these very significant budget impacts that can come from a very bad budget. Which is why I worry about it.
Sure. Thank you. And I do want to just reiterate that it sounds like the district is really putting a lot of effort into, first of all, making sure that our kids get the social emotional curriculum that they need, but also in a cost-effective way, trying to leverage some of the opportunities that have been kind of put out there to do this for our kids in a cost-effective way. So I know I'm reiterating what you just said, Dr. Willett, but I want to thank you and commend you for that type of work, because not only is the subject matter absolutely essential to our children, and I think we're going to hear more about that from the mental health subcommittee coming up soon, about mental health for children. I know Jaden has a lot of things to say about children's mental health. This is some really, really important stuff. And it sounds like our district is able to provide that to our kids, and not only to provide it to our kids, but to do it in a smart, thoughtful, data-based program that is cost effective. And that, I think that shouldn't be overlooked. So thank you. Thank you for that. I have a question I know the answer to, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because I get asked this question a lot. The Tolland Public Schools has a lot of open positions, right? Like there's a lot of vacant positions. There are a couple line items on the budget. One of them is for salaries, right? And another one is for substitutes. And if we use all the substitute line item to cover the vacant salaries, doesn't that leave some extra money somewhere in the unpaid salary line?
Quite a bit. But I was just take the Griffin tried to cut it already. Answered that question in the last meeting.
Yeah, I was gonna say we had that full discussion on the last meeting. Dr. Will, do you want to respond?
Well, yeah, and you know, while we do have, you know, when we're talking about different lines, you know, like the certified sub line, about 152 spent for 95 school days. That's a burn rate of about $1,600 a day. So we expect to spend another 139 if we're going to have 87 days left, which would put that negative. So some of the budgets you're looking at are going to go flat or negative by the end of the year. Some that do have some positive balance, you know, those are because we're having problems, you know, with COVID related after effects. So because there are some parapositions, things like that are unfilled, you know, we have subs covering that. The problem is, you know, on the silver lining side, you may not be paying those people the same thing you might pay the sub, but on the detrimental side, your special ed, you know, identifications are up to 32%, and they used to be 12. Your expenditures for special ed look like they're going to be 400,000 to 600,000 more than they ever have been, you know, then and so on. So the pandemic brings with it things that look like a silver lining, like, hey, look, you're picking it up here, but you're losing it in other places. I do not expect us to end this budget year flush. I expect us to end this budget year tight, just like we did last time. But I'm very worried about some of the, in particular, special ed, you know, lines, things like that. So, you know, most of those lines look like they have some balance here. They're going to be eaten up easily by the lines that are being overrun by all the additional costs, tuition, transportation costs up, special ed, you know, in general costs up. So it's going to be a wash. It's not like looking at one of those lines and thinking, hey, we're going to make it just fine. It's my job to make sure that we do not end below zero, and that's not at all guaranteed at this point. So even in the future, you know, I don't think we're out of this pandemic blip here for, you know, a while. I think we're going to see the learning impacts result in higher special ed designations and other things for at least a few years. And next year, if you cut something, say, like that line that supports the that group, you know, if they're connected to IEPs and PPTs, we're going to have to bring them back anyway. So it would end up incurring against the remaining budget. So it's just not an area to really look at and say, hey, you know, this is going to make all the difference. It really isn't going to make that difference. We're going to be tight this year as you come in, and we're going to need an increase in that line to make sure we're okay.
You know, I'll just add on a couple of things with that because, you know, I used to sub in the schools, right? So I don't know what I would get when I go, right? It's like, oh, we're needed. And I will tell you from 4 years ago, even to now, we don't have the staff that we should for the 504s, for the IEPs. If we don't have those, so you figure a sub can go in for the teachers that can go and prepare us who are actually filled, right? And the unfilled, we still need those spots because they technically really should be with the student. There's a lot of one-on-ones, there's a lot of classroom paras. I mean, like Galichan had said, I've been there, I've done the job. So we can't just sit there and say, well, let's just get rid of this line, they're not filled. But then you're just going to start talking about, you know, legalities. Are we not following these 504s? Are we not talking about the IEPs? That's where it becomes a fuzzy line, right? So if you get someone coming in, where are they going to be, or where do they need to go? So we're not in trouble legally. That's, you know, you have to remember all those little pieces of the puzzle that go together. And 4 years ago, and so today, it's still an issue. And there are plenty of times where I had numerous kids, and I would go from one spot to another spot to another spot to another spot, and it would be combined schedules just so that those IEPs, those 504s were followed.
So what happens if the district doesn't meet? You talk about legalities and we're required to meet these 504s and IEPs. What happens if, you know, in hard decisions, we just can't meet those?
Well, that would be a Dr. Willett question.
Well, I mean, basically, if you're not meeting my child's needs, I'm bringing you to a hearing, and, you know, I'm gonna make sure that you provide a program that does. What that means that the district will have to either provide programming from, you know, consulting, or if we don't have the people in, we're gonna have to hire the people in. Speech language path, for instance, if we don't have a speech language path that's covering, or they don't, you know, there's too much of a caseload, you can't cover that student, and the parent doesn't feel like that's adequately happening, they'll come in, bring us to a hearing, and we'll be ordered to provide that, and it'll happen from PrEC or a RESC, and it'll cost us much more than it would for the cost of just having that program sustained. You know, and similarly, in the worst case scenario of it, they'll have evidence and be able to show that we can't adequately cover the educational needs of the child, and that will result in an outplacement. And again, your average outplacement is $97,000, and you're spending over $2 million at this point with that. So you don't want to be in a position where with one child is costing $100,000 versus with the parent, you know, having the parents in the right place.
So I'm hearing adequate staffing is actually cost effective.
At the end of the day, you would have to have the staff to have people, but you also have to pay competitive wages and keep people going. Like, we have to make ourselves somewhat, you know, desirable place to come and work. But like you said, with the negotiations, we're still below of what, you know, we negotiated with. So it's, you know, we do have a loyal staff, and I thank them for what they do for our students. But that, you know, that still only goes but so far, and you're cutting staff when you're not giving what our students provided. And that goes back to why I voted the way I did on this budget. Because I really don't want to see anything. I don't want to see programs moving. I think that's how I feel.
Thank you. Those were all my questions. Thanks, Stephen.
That's Marie, and then I think Ashley, you pointed out there's a question from a resident and kind of frame it in a way that is asking about the Board of Education budget. This actually might go to Lisa. Because they asked a little bit about fund balance and the usage of it towards the whole budget. I think Christina brought that up at one point, talking about, you know, the savings. So I know in years past we kind of trended, you know, obviously I think when Mike Rosen was here, we used a substantial amount for kind of a COVID year. And obviously we tried to trend it down a little bit. You know, what's the average that we generally put towards the whole budget, and, you know, what is a reasonable amount in your opinion, as well as, you know, what do we try not to exceed or try to maintain as a fund to maintain our AAA ratings? That was kind of the gist of their question.
The average is about 200,000.
Okay.
You know, as you mentioned, some years were higher, some were lower. What you'll see in this year's budget that we're working on is probably 200,000 plus another 68,000 from a restricted fund balance for the debt that we had planned to cover.
That's the sewer.
No, this is for our debt management plan. And we planned that we would have to be increasing it $50,000 a year. And we had put money from the debt service fund into the general fund several years ago to deal with the impact on taxes going forward when this hit. So now that's the increase in debt is not going to increase taxes because we have the other money in place for that. So, you know, that's the average. I did share with most of the town council members last night, West Hartford, which is a very affluent community, has had a AAA rating for years, and they started draining their fund balance. They started increasing debt to a point where it was becoming too much, and they were downgraded. Once you start digging into all of your reserves that you have based on you have a fund balance policy, you do risk that, and that certainly can cost a lot more since we do have debt that is planned to be issued over the next 5 years at least. So that could end up costing more in the long run.
No, that does help a little bit, and I think I'm kind of eyeballing Councilor Murray. I don't know if we received that email you're referring to, so I just don't recall it. So I might be incorrect.
Yeah, I don't think I saw it either. You mentioned that earlier today.
I sent it to town council.
I would double check, but I also know that we've been having some spam issues. But I thought maybe you could do pretty quickly. So
we'll take your word on West Hartford.
Yeah, I'll take, I believe you, it's just we haven't seen that communication.
Yeah, so
No wonder why West Hartford's going, what is it?
Thank you for telling me that. Are you checking in
my emails you guys
and see why you didn't get it?
Oh, really?
So the town council at tollandct.gov, I'm wondering if there's a problem with that.
I know we've been seeing an increase in spam related issues, so yeah, I'm wondering if there's maybe we have to circle back with IT to make sure that.
Well, we got Klaus DeJong's back.
Yeah. But to ground us back to the budget question, at least one other question that I had was what is the current, and this is gonna be obviously a question to go through the budget process. Now that's kind of going over to our side, but what is the current balance of the tax stabilization funds? I know we've used that in the past to offset increases in bill rates. Obviously, that's something that also we have to factor in as we go forward with the process.
There, as of the end of last year, there was about 140,000 or 142,000, something about that amount. And this year you will be having another contribution because we did get some unexpected state revenue. And I think that's probably going to be another couple $100,000.
Okay. Yeah, that was from.
It gets split up based on the ordinance. That's from municipal sharing.
Yeah, that was from, I think, yeah, as Councilor was just saying, that's from, we were kind of anticipating lower than expected contribution to the state, and they actually delivered what was initially expected from the governor's budget. Okay. All right, that's the only other question I had. I'll open the floor to any other questions from council members before we, or actually. Yeah.
Can we perhaps consider, we're talking about tax stabilization fund, and I know that we had 200,000 from the Honeywell settlement. Could we perhaps consider an insurance stabilization fund? Not necessarily talking about the unassigned fund balance, as I'm sure we don't want to affect our bond rating, but perhaps that's something that we can think about if in fact this is a blip, as seems to be the word that everybody has used. This is something to throw out there. Thank you.
Interesting concept. Obviously, I'll let that be an issue to ruminate with Lisa and Mike. I don't know other towns. I mean, that's each is pretty unique, but I don't know if that's something that could be considered.
That's not usually something when you have a self-insurance fund like that. The self-insurance fund should be developed in a way to have funds reserved in there. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to reserve as much as it would be nice to have to do something like that. Whatever reserves that have been built over the years have been used to offset the budget over several years to try to make the impact as less as possible.
Any other questions from council members?
I just want to make a statement before sounds like we're closing up. I just want to say this meeting was very, worked really well together. I was a little nervous coming into it, because of split vote and everything, but I appreciate very positive conversation with each other. I agree.
Any other
That's
comments,
it.
questions? I'm just getting over any of my final questions, comments.
One comment. I know we are not a bus company or whatever it is, not an insurance company, but every year we have this argument about budget and everything else, every expense is going up, everything else, but my only suggestion request to Lisa and mine start planning something for the future, because this problem will not go away every year. Every year is on this, obviously salaries and everything else, everything is going up. And at the same time, our problem as a residents, I mean, we are part of the inflation too. It's not only you, I said, affecting every other person, every person at the back. So we got to plan something for the future. You're magical district, so you can do.
I'm working on it. It's a pretty big rate of percent on my hand.
One thing I can say is start using your stick from here point on. Okay. I don't think I can say. Otherwise, nothing.
All right. See no other comments, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn at 10:12 p.m.
So move.
By Councilor Lucas, second by Councilor Murray, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.